I like that.
Yeah. And the left is middle finger. Anyway. Yeah, but we made it that way.
Okay, good morning, everyone. Looks like we still have a few people rolling in, a few conversations going on. We've got some competition across the hall here today, so we're going to have to be really loud and excited, so everyone make sure you cheer and get really excited about MAPSIT and PSDI today.
That's not a problem for some people.
That's true. Thank you, Dave. I couldn't quite hear that. Thank you. Staying through the week and participating today. Hopefully you'll get a lot of really great people we'll be talking about. Before we get started, just a few quick announcements. In general, for all the speakers today, we have the lavalier mic. We've been having a little bit of issue with people being a little bit quiet and or turning away from the mic during the talks this week. So when you come up, try and put it on your right side of your lapel here, so that when you turn and look at the screen, everyone can still hear you. Come up as soon as you can and get this all hooked up. If you haven't already gotten your talk loaded up, make sure you do that during the break. Before we get started, though, I would like to take a moment and I would like to thank Lisa Gaddis, Trent Hare, and Debbie Mitchell for putting on a fantastic meeting this week and all the hard work. It's much appreciated. So let's give them a round of applause. And if you have posters out there, please make sure you take them down by the end of today. If you don't, just like LPSC style, they will be recycled in the circular recycling bin. So please make sure you take those down. Video streaming, I think, still. And so for talk to be live video streamed, please make sure to let Trent know so that we can have the camera turned off. With that being said, we'll get started today, and our first speaker is going to be Janie Radebach, and she'll give us an introduction to MAPSIT. In the immortal words, though, of Steve Harvey, we got a good one for you today. So make sure you stick around and give us all your feedback. We're going to be really interested in it. Go ahead and turn it over to Janie.
All right, thank you, Justin, and stuck around. This is a really good crowd. I might take a picture of you in a little while. And also, I think I heard a gong over there, so I don't know. We ought to try to like step it up and make sure that we can compete. Okay. What I want to do is help us step a little bit out into philosophy today and talk about how we can have the powers that be up above help us that have to do with data, acquiring data, processing it, and making it accessible to everyone. And so, so that's what MAPSIT is, and I'll talk a little bit more about what we mean by MAPSIT, Mapping and Planetary Spatial Infrastructure Team, okay? And so, why do we exist? A little bit of background. So, essentially, we've got a lot of things that we have in terms of data, a lot of products that come out of data, a lot of initial data that's obtained. And so here's an example right here of mosaics. You see this little tiny corner over here. Little image, some of you might know what it is, but when we put it in the context of everything else, then you realize, okay, yeah, there's this image that sits inside of a larger mosaic of Pluto and of Sputnik Planitia. So putting all of that together is really important, and it's important that we're able to do that quickly, be able to help other people access those things. And we also have a lot of geologic maps. Of course, you talked a lot about that this week. Here's a geologic map of Mars and the associated region. There are derived regional products. This is an image of the Shangri-La region on Titan. And here you can see an image of radar overlaid on top of some bins and ISS. And we're at the stage where putting all three of those instruments together to understand the surface of Titan is really critical and necessary to be able to take it another step farther beyond what we've already done with the initial, okay, there are sand dunes or there are mountains or whatever, and down into what are they made of, and how is the sand distributed, and how all these kinds of, it's critical that we can look at data sets together and that they can be registered well on top of each other. Some really interesting global data products have come out. This is a beautiful map of Mercury, regional elevation map of Mercury that's put together at the end of the Messenger mission. And so sometimes these things end up coming about because of, we'll talk a little bit about end-of-mission products. And then we don't also forget the associated geospatial infrastructure. We'll talk more about that today. Everything that links these things together and helps us put them together. Integral to the success of planetary science. Okay? And so this is what we see as our sort of defining phrase. All of these things are important for the success of planetary science. The mission life cycle, for investigations and operations, to how do we obtain the data, to what do we do with it afterwards. And then what we want to do is think about what kinds of strategic needs do we have, what we need, and prioritize different things as a community. Then that helps us to better poise ourselves to obtain the data and use it rapidly and be able to disseminate it to people and get the most out of it, really. And so, so we want to start to do that. We want to have, essentially, we're sort of like this community group that is tasked with this. What is MAPSIT exactly? And there have been a couple of iterations of something that was called the Planetary Cartography and Geologic Mapping Working Group. We've had maybe the longest acronym that you can have of a name. I don't know. A couple of other earlier groups from that as well. And mainly this was communicating, what are the needs of the USGS, what kinds of mapping needs are there. For a while there was cartography strongly in the name. And but there were other data processing tools and needs discussed at the time as well. And so just in the last couple of years, NASA has recognized the community group styled much after the AGs. And so effectively we operate an advisory group or an AG assessment group, not advisory. And so, and this is because we've got these vast volumes of data returned from missions. There's a lot of discussion about, well, I can't get analysis proposal funded because of this and that. So NASA is paying attention to that, trying to understand how to deal with this basically very important data that comes back from missions. And then also to have to use that to plan for other missions as well. So again, we're independent of location of the solar system. Of course, we've got data all over the solar system. Contact at headquarters, and that's Sarah Noble. And we'll hear in a little while if she's on the phone and can answer a couple of questions right after this. And so we can actually look to the terrestrial groups, terrestrial data, essentially to see that we've been dealing with huge amounts of data for terrestrial science for a long time. And so there have been a lot of similar discussions and needs and lots of infrastructure frameworks put together for terrestrial data. And so as we're thinking about that, of course, the same thing is true for planetary. So science and also exploration needs for collecting data, for handling these data volumes, and also strategizing for community access and usability. Emerging into this realm of terrestrial science that terrestrial science has been dealing with. We have these huge volumes of data now, especially, and not only that, really wide varieties of platforms and software and things like that. So what we're starting to do is go out and look at the terrestrial community and see what kinds of SDIs they have in place, what kinds of in which they are dealing with these data, where do they put them, how do they make it accessible to everybody. And then also, in terms of of NASA, essentially space missions have traditionally been designed to obtain data. Of course, a little bit about, okay, here's what you should do with the data afterwards, give us a plan or whatever, but I feel like in the last couple of proposal calls, especially even mission calls, the plan is a lot more required than it was in previous. And so recognizing the value of data and putting in measures in place to use it to its fullest potential. Another example is that in your own RNA proposals, you've got to have a data management plan. You know, decent. It's got to be good enough to pass the panel. And then this is pretty new, and maybe we can talk about this, using NASA's PubSpace. I think it's required now. So NASA would like to see you, they're giving you to do things with data to benefit other people. And then also NASA put PR in place. I think this has been a really good thing and a nice recognition by NASA of the fact that we need to be able to have data analysis only proposals that can get funded. Well, you had a little bit of discussion yesterday, a lot I guess, on the PDS. How is MAPSIT and how is planetary spatial data infrastructure? Yes. So basically, the PDS is a very specific entity that I see existing within this idea of PSDI and MAPSIT and what we're doing. The PDS is tasked with mainly with the stability, the security, and the long-term preservation of data, mainly that. There are other things that they're also considering as well, that's true, but I think PDS necessarily has to do that. So we're in a space where they are doing that, which is a good thing. As we think about this in an overarching way, a planetary spatial data infrastructure has to address also data usability and data access in a very straightforward way. And so we're essentially the community that's saying, hey, not only is it important to store, but we need to make sure everybody can access it and use it. And so if we do that via the PDS, that would be great. We with how it's done yet. We're thinking more about the philosophy. And here's some things about what we think needs to be done. And so MAPSIT is concerned with user needs. And then also we want to think broadly over the long term because technology is evolving so rapidly. Of course, data sort of access is changing, and also this human technology interface is going to rapidly change. And if we're not prepared, if we're not thinking about that, strategizing ahead of time, then we're always only catching up afterwards, and that's a disservice. So again, we want to think about the philosophy of this problem. And really, I feel like the underpinning question here, or here, is that data has to be accessible and usable. NASA essentially would like MAPSIT, because we're an assessment group and we're reporting directly to NASA. They would like us to help them prioritize strategies for the best data acquisition and processing and storage and usability. So thinking about it from beginning to end. And again, so prioritizing strategies, what as a community do we want to see happen? And ultimately be sure that planetary data are as accessible and usable as possible. Really, we're helping them make the most of this treasure trove of data obtained at great pains and cost, and they recognize this and value it. They would like a roadmap. This is their ammunition. This is how they can make policy happen. This is how they can choose where to put money, is to have a roadmap. And so a roadmap helps prioritize how this goes into the future. And you've seen, for example, Jim Green use the decadal survey. He'll reveal that, say, look, this is what the decadal survey says. We would like really similar to this. Okay, I think that's the last. Are there questions? Or there's time for questions? Are there questions?
So it's on the top.
Notes.
Hi, it's Ray Arvidsson from Washington University in St. Louis. I'm here at this moment representing the PDS. It's a little bit broader than you stated. I'm working with providers to ensure we get both the raw data and the derived data to the extent that costs allow and budgets allow derived data products to be produced. And then we spend a lot of time peer review, getting the data into the right format, the right content, in order for the data to be useful. But we also have a charter to make the data available. It totally complements the PDS. But the charter is a little bit broader than the three things I forget. Just think about that. It goes back to Kate Crombie's talk a day or two ago, in which she said you really need a systems view. We do take a systems view on the PDS, but we can't do everything. And better information on usability and accessibility is critical. So the roadmap that you guys are involved in is going to be very important. We're also working in the geosciences node with about 3 dozen PDART and DAP providers, but they're individuals. Anyone doing a PDART or a DAP, make sure you have a strong data management plan. Have the note of interest and get a letter of support with the data management plan. Because the reviews these days get knocked down pretty dramatically if you don't have that in there. Because of the 36 or so people we're working with, some we never hear from. And NASA headquarters now knows that. To kind of get planning started right away. You know, if you're a PDARter or a DAPper, don't wait till the last week of your kind of planning session, because we need to work with the providers, either missions or individuals, to make sure they understand what the format, the content, the documentation will be. And so those are kind of 2 comments as a PDS representative. You guys are doing what you're doing.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, actually, I think that's really important. All these things that you're doing, and you're right. I was sort of more narrow, I think, in terms of defining what PDS has been doing. An important point that you said you can't necessarily be responsible for doing everything, and I think that's where this can help us say what needs does the PDS have, and how can we need to do those things. And yeah, exactly.
So I haven't talked about this an hour and a half or something like that, so I will address more of what you're talking about. Right? Sure. Thank you.
Yeah, and also I think that's the way NASA can help with is inform the community about these kinds of things. If you're going to do a PDART, if you want to propose a PDART, here are ways you can get funded. You know, first of all, make sure you have a solid data management plan, and that you want to continually, communicate with them regularly, and sorts of things that we want to help people understand. I guess modes of behavior that we can start to enable people. So I appreciate those comments.
Hi, Frank Hill, JPL. The great goals. I do worry a little bit about the first sentence in terms of like we don't want to do that. I think we should pay our for storage and archive long term, but concentrating on usability, data in formats that tools use, and let that data evolve, you know, as a live data set as opposed to an archive data set, so it can grow and be more accessible by they advance. Kind of a separate comment I have is about PDART, talk about having a data management plan. I'm sorry, this is probably going to go what you're talking about today, but don't talk data management plans, but some of us were trying to propose just tools and not building up data set. And I personally got dinged after a lot of people got dinged about that. So realm of proposing in PDART, or making new software tools, we need to have mechanisms to propose a new tool, and not a new tool that has to be backed up by amounts of data to make it valid. Because that seems kind of contradictory to developing a software tool. Sorry, I'm actually leaving early, that's why I'm asking this question now. Or putting it out there.
That's really important, and so these are things that I say, how would you strategize for this, or what do you think? And maybe she'll say, oh yeah, that's a gap and talk about. Because of course, Maps is not just going to be thinking about data, but the tools are very important. So.
Sarah, a friend, I don't know if you do but Sarah's actually online right now, so we do have questions for her as well.
Right, so I'll state also that in following to that thread, I had a conversation with Sarah about that topic, and she acknowledged that the number of data set production PDARTs versus the number of tool, that balance in the first year, she thought, I think, and she can verify this, was and that balance has come up a little bit, and I suspect that it will continue to kind of equalize. So.
Thanks, Ross. Yeah, and actually, maybe I should title the slide before that about PDS, and that's different from. I almost think of NASID as repeating or redoing or anything, whatever PDS is doing. Of course, stay in close contact with PDS and say, how are you doing? What are you doing? And what kinds of needs do you have? So it's sort of in philosophy, we're the overarching philosophical group was doing, helping enable what is happening. And I see it more that way. So yes, can't do or whatever it is by some other means. And maybe, this idea of third order or whatever accessibility ideas are either done at the PDS or done elsewhere. And that remains for us to discuss and figure out. And we'll talk more about that during the PSDI discussion. Lots of spatial data infrastructures that we start wielding and using and bring to our benefit in many different arenas.
So I mentioned that Sarah Noble is on the phone, and we want to give her an opportunity to make a few statements here in just a moment. And so that leads me to the point that I neglected to mention. We'll have a few changes with regards to our agenda today with respect to what you see in the program. So in addition to having Sarah make a few additional, take a few questions, we'll also have a discussion panel at the end of the day. And so Jay Laura's talk that was scheduled for 10:15, we're going to cancel that one, and then we'll have a few extra minutes from about 11 to 12 to have a discussion panel a little later today. So a lot of good things for us to be talking about. So right now we've got about 10 minutes before David Williams comes on for Sarah Noble to give some statements. And JD, I don't know if you want to take the lapel mic and maybe put it next to the phone and let Sarah say a few words if she'd like.
Yeah, Sarah, are you on?
I'm here. Can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
Excellent. I'm having a little trouble hearing you, but I'm trying to follow the conversation. And I'm really sorry I'm not there in person, but thank you for fitting me into the schedule. I'm actually on my way to the airport right now, so a little complicated this morning, but I've got a few minutes and I'm happy to answer questions. The only thing I really wanted to talk about is delinquent maps. Some of you got letters last week about your delinquent maps. If you didn't get a letter, it means you're not yet delinquent. So good job. But it is sort of a warning sign to the community that we are not going to let maps sit on the books for decades. We're trying to clean things up now and get the ones that are in process moved through. Changes coming up, starting probably even this year, wherein when you are approved to do a map, there will be a sunset on that map. You'll have, I think we're going to settle on like 5 years funded to until you submit the map to Jim. And we'll be, there will be obviously, we're not, going to be super hard nosed about this. Like if there are reasons that you're behind for whatever, we will listen to your reasoning, but we're not going to let things sit on the books for decades anymore. It's not fair to the rest of the community who may want to propose and can't because you're sitting on them. And it's not fair to Jim trying to keep track of all the dozens of people who have their delinquent maps out. So just if you haven't gotten a letter yet, I just want a word of warning out there to those of you who are planning to sit on your map for the next 20 years. That's not going to happen. If you did get a letter and you need to talk to Jim or I about that, please do. Again, we're not trying to be draconian here. We're just trying to clean up the books. Any questions about that?
I don't see anybody jumping up.
Okay. Have any other questions?
So Sarah, I don't know if you, Kayla's question balance tool proposals that were funded in PDART versus data set in PDART. If you could say anything about that, is it just that the tool people wrote bad proposals, or might be the way to change that balance, or maybe the balance is fine? I don't know what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah, so tools are important, and your explanation, Ross, was correct. The first year we did PDART, I think none of the tool ones rose to the top, and I think part of that was us and not really understanding software. The panels were not quite on track with things. So we give them different instructions the second year, and so now the tool proposals, in the third year have started to rise to the top, and we have actually funded, and I do plan to keep a balance. I always make sure that we're spreading the love around in PDART. So we're going to continue to fund the best tools of the PDART collection.
Thank you.
I have a question for Sarah.
Oh, Dave Williams here with a question.
Sarah, can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay. This is just in case you're not on for my talk, which is coming next. But one of the things we're discussing in the planetary geologic mapping community, train the next generation of students to become geologic mappers. And one of the things that we're going to report and are finding is request an opinion from NASA whether you would support a proposal to establish a periodic summer planetary geologic mapping workshop after the University of Hawaii's Planetary Volcanology Summer Workshop. If the community decides to move forward with this, we would use as a tool to train new mappers. It seems to me there was some sort of a NASA program where you could propose conferences and workshops. I don't know what the status of that is. Can you comment?
The Rose's element is called SWIFT Topical Conferences and Workshops. There is a Rose's call. It's separate from the other calls, but there is a particular Rose's call you can apply to. And yeah, I think that's a perfectly reasonable thing for us to consider.
Great, thank you very much.
Sarah, I don't know if there's anything to say about the fact that the RNA reorganization report came out, and I guess there wasn't too much discussion about data, but there was a little bit about how it seems like some, data analysis and data products are a little bit underfunded. Is there anything more to say about that?
I think that's been a perennial problem with our missions, right? They always seem to get cut first. PDART was created in part to help with that problem, but I think that we are also understanding that that's an issue. We've been going back to our missions with Messenger. We did this with Laddie, and we're going to start doing this, I think, with more and more missions. Is towards the end of the mission, going back and looking and saying, realistically, what data are we missing? What data do we really want? And making sure that the teams are actually funded to provide this data before they, disassemble themselves. So I think that's really a positive step in the right direction. So I think that we are making some course corrections to those things.
Do you think that will affect anything like Cassini, for example, at closeout, or other missions now, or what do you think?
Cassini, I'm not the one to ask on Cassini, but I think that for sure in the discovery and frontiers realm, it's something that we are looking to do on a regular basis.
I have one last thing. I don't see others rushing the mic, but just if you about roadmap, anything extra about from your perspective, what you think is valuable about that from this group?
Personally, I'm really grateful that you guys are doing this. I think, particularly when we're looking at making selections in regular RNA grants, it's really helpful to have some guidance from the community about what is important, particularly in PDART, right? The whole point of PDART is community service. So if you guys can give us some direction about what direction the community should be going and what's really important to the community, then that is very helpful to me. And I can point to a roadmap and go see if the community really says this is important.
Okay. Thank you so much, Sarah. Thanks for calling in.
If you need to listen for a while, eventually I'm going to have to drop off. I'm fine.
Okay, and jump in if there's anything you have, and we'll put a mic on here.
Okay, thank you, Jamie. Thank you, Sarah. Our next talk will be by David Williams. We'll talk a little bit about NASA's planetary geologic mapping community and the reports and findings. All righty. Can everybody hear me? Problem. For those of you who may not know me, I'm Dave Williams. I'm a member of the MapSit Steering Committee, and I serve as the Planetary Geologic Mapping Community representative on that committee. In parallel with the Data Users Workshop that's been going on this week, we had a Planetary Geological Mappers meeting on Monday and Tuesday. I'm here to report the nature and outcome of that meeting and the findings we had from our community discussion. So for many, many years, we've done this annual meeting of NASA-funded planetary geologic mappers, and it's more or less required by NASA that funded mappers attend this meeting, and the purpose is to report the progress that people are making on their NASA-funded geologic maps, an opportunity to just discuss problems or issues that people might be having where they would like to have input from their fellow mappers. For this particular meeting in 2017, over the 2 days, Monday and Tuesday of the meeting, we had 21 oral presentations focused on the science of the maps and the progress of the maps. Plus, we had 2 technical talks, 14 poster presentations, and we had 2 distinct community discussion sections during our meeting. The solar system bodies that were discussed in this particular meeting where geologic maps are actively being made and represented include Mercury, Mars, asteroid Vesta, dwarf planet Ceres, Blood, Titan, and Enceladus. So we're basically covering bodies throughout the solar system, although the vast majority of the talks were on Mars geologic maps. So for those of you who just arrived, here was the schedule of our activities. The daytime was mostly on oral presentations and a dedicated poster presentation section on Monday night, built in 2 distinct community discussion sections. So the first one was to lay out topics for discussion and then have people be able to think about it over a day, and then to sort of finalize them at our second community discussion on Thursday, which led to the findings that I'm going to present. So I'll just jump right in with our findings, and I apologize, I'm just going to read this for you. Finding 1, the planetary geologic mapping community recognizes the significance of NASA's long-term investment in not only supportive infrastructure, GS and their support for planetary mapping program, but also institutional and scientific knowledge. The various folks at the USGS who work on this, as well as at other places, with respect to the processes and products of planetary geologic mapping. Our members, and we commit to continued communication between planetary geologic mapping, discipline scientists, and both the broader planetary mapping community and our NASA program managers to ensure a continued high return on NASA's investment. We want to do all we can to make sure that the money spent on planetary geologic mapping, quality maps, to deliver the best quality science, and is most beneficial to the whole planetary science community. Finding number 2, the planetary geologic mapping community perceives there to be inconsistencies in review panel comments per program for non-selected proposals that include production of USGS geologic map. We recommend that proposers who intend to produce a USGS geologic map strive to thoroughly address and clearly describe the methods, justification, and relevance. We recommend that NASA program managers continue to include geologic mappers on review panels containing mapping proposals across all where geologic mapping proposals are submitted. And we recommend that NASA program managers continue to remind review panels that USGS published geologic maps can result from efforts performed under the various RNA programs. From some of our members who have gotten the impression that
some review panels are not fully appreciating what is trying to be accomplished in the geologic mapping proposal. So we just want to see that everything is treated equally and fairly, and a large part of that comes from our mapping community. Sure that when NASA calls us to serve as reviewers, serve on NASA review panels that might have mapping proposals, that we serve on those review panels, or in lieu of that, that we at least provide external reviews, because those can be very, very important to understand whether a mapping proposal is truly a good effort. Finding number 3, the Planetary Geologic Mapping Community recognizes that both USGS, standardized geologic maps, as well as what we would call non-standard geologic maps, the ones that would be a peer-reviewed journal, contribute to the broad understanding of geologic frameworks across multiple solar system objects. In other words, there is a room for both kinds of maps in helping to advance the science we're trying to understand. Number 4, the planetary geologic mapping community is more healthy when it includes a broad section of geoscience map creators and users. Of the community, we suggest the following. We invite all planetary mappers to attend our annual Planetary Geologic Mappers meeting, which we will do henceforth. Continue to investigate ways to increase the training of new mappers, bring new people into this particular field, and I'll enumerate a number of ideas on that later in a later finding. Finding number 5, the level of scientific investigation that can be included in PDR proposals that will result in a USGS published geologic map remains a point of confusion to members of the planetary geologic mapping community, particularly when a new mapping would be included as part of this PDR proposal. Clarification from NASA program managers for the types of proposals that are acceptable to the various RNA programs, perhaps via hypothetical examples. And in most cases, this is specific to PDR, because that seems to be the place where we're still grappling with new maps as part of that relatively new program. Finding number 6. The planetary geologic mapping community is concerned about maintaining an appropriate level of expertise and institutional knowledge in the creation of scale-based planetary geologic maps. First, this is in regard to what I just asked Sarah, we request an opinion whether NASA would support a proposal to establish a periodic summer planetary geologic mapping workshop modeled after Hawaii's planetary volcanology summer workshop. And we all heard the answer to that, but yes. We recommend that the USGS consider establishing a geologic mapping internship or postdoc fellowship. We recommend that all mapping proposers include, wherever possible, graduate students to help propagate the planetary geologic mapping body of knowledge into. This is probably the best way to bring new people in, is when us professor types at universities have a mapping proposal and we use it to fund a master's student to do a geologic map, or a PhD student for that. We recommend that we consider, or NASA consider, including geologic mapping training exercises into existing NASA-supported field workshops where appropriate. Peter McGinnis-Mark mentioned that they do have a mapping exercise in the volcanology summer workshop to help improve the situation. We recommend that we build in a training component in each planetary mappers meeting. This could be a half-day or a full-day training session on some aspect of planetary geologic mapping that this particular meeting. And finally, if a planetary geologic mapping summer workshop should be proposed, accepted, and approved, we would request that we could use, NASA should build in money for student travel grants to help bring out students to actually come to the workshop. They need all the financial support they can get to participate in these types of educational opportunities. Finding number 7, the planetary geologic mapping community recognizes that the annual meeting is an effective venue for discussing issues related to specific mapping projects. In order to expand the effectiveness of the annual meeting, we recommend the following. Future planetary geologic mappers meetings be scheduled separately from future meetings or hold such meetings in series rather than parallel. And the motivation for this was a lot of the mappers who were here on Monday and Tuesday really wanted to participate in the sessions in the data users workshop, but they couldn't because they were in the mappers meeting. So this is a lesson learned. Let's do it so that maybe have one meeting and then the other one follows, so the mappers can attend the data users workshop or vice versa. We recommend inclusion of breakout sessions for specific topics related to planetary geologic mapping. And what we mean by this is have blocks of time during the meeting, groups who are working on a specific map can just lay out a hard copy of their map, and people can just gather around and draw on it and contacts or units or something like that. It's something that existed in in these annual mappers meetings many years ago, but something we've sort of gotten away from. And this is something we actually tried on Monday, and it worked really well. So we want to try and keep that included. And the inclusion of a dedicated evening poster session. Having the dedicated poster session here at this meeting on Monday night with both the data users out there and the mappers over here was a really great opportunity. Created discussions at people's posters. So that worked out really well for us. And then finally, we recommend a broader advertisement of the annual mappers meeting to ensure that community mappers are aware and encouraged to attend beyond those who are just wanted to create the USGS maps. Awareness and inclusivity and wanting to have multiple ways of letting people know throughout the year that there's going to be another mappers meeting coming up in the next year. And then finally, finding number 8, the Planetary Geologic Mapping Committee would like to enhance NASA's investment in geologic mapping through improvement in citation data maps. We as a community need to investigate how our community evaluates geologic map citations, and we want to encourage the planetary science community to consider published USGS geologic maps as valuable as other peer-reviewed journal publications. Some final notes here, and this is going back to what I mentioned earlier. When we put out a flyer advertising the meeting, we want to try and make it open to anybody who's interested in planetary mapping, not just geologic mapping, not just USGS published mapping, but all types of mapping, broaden our community. We decided that the next meeting, the next annual Planetary Geologic Mappers meeting will be the week of June 11th through 15th, 2018. The University of Tennessee, Knoxville, and Devin Burr has volunteered to host the meeting, so we appreciate that. The last item I'm going to put up here is something that we'd like some broader consideration from the audience. We had discussion about mapping priorities, and by that I mean what geologic maps the community think should be prioritized to be produced in the coming years to decades. And you can look at this in terms of global geologic maps, regional geologic maps from the hemisphere to a slightly smaller region maps. And this is the slide for global maps here. And there's question marks there whether some of these things are needed or whether it's reasonable to request them to be or produced right now. So I'm just going to leave this up here, and you can look at it. And if anybody wants to comment or send me comments, please feel free to email me. My email address is david@asu.edu, and you can send me comments about this, about any of the findings that we will finalize here. So at this point, I'll stop and take questions. Thank you very much for your attention.
I think Jim presented on the survey that went out to the community. Do you have?
Yeah, he commented on the in our discussion section on the planetary geologic mapping survey that was.
Was there anything that you guys thought was enlightening or?
The information that he sent out, he sent it to everybody in our mapping group, but I don't think most people have had a chance to digest that yet. So I think we want to more generally comment on that internally before we make some broader comments. If Jim is, I don't know if Jim's here right now. About that now.
He's dropping off his kid, I think.
If that wants to be brought up during the discussion section, I think we can do that.
Okay.
Yeah, Jamie?
It sounded like one of the findings might have been that, or one of the outcomes of the survey is that both kinds of maps are valuable. Just, of course, official GS geologic maps, but also what you called, I think, scale-based planetary geologic maps. What is it? I guess what is a scale-based?
Scale-based is just basically any geologic map published at a given scale, whether it's global maps of like 1 to 15 million or something like that, or regional maps of something that 1 to 2 million. Where thanks to we have these high-resolution data sets like HiRise and LROC NAC, people are starting to make geologic maps of very, very small regions, localized regions on planetary surface. So the term scale-based covers the full range of all possible geologic maps. And the difference is published maps versus what we use the term non-standardized for ones that don't go through the USGS review process, and they're the ones that most of us will publish in peer-reviewed journals. I've done my fair share of maps published in peer-reviewed journals, whether it be from or Titan or Vesta or Ceres. So I think there's a place where all these types of maps are important and useful, and so we want to make everybody feel welcome. We don't want people to think that one is better than the other necessarily. They all have a value in the science, and so that's what we're trying to encourage.
Yeah, it seems like.
Did it just die?
I'll talk really loud.
Time's up, yeah.
Oh, okay.
Now it's dead.
It seems like one of the things MAPSIT wants to consider in general. So MAPSIT has a big push, it seems like, to increase awareness in the broader community about PSDI outside of the data users community. And it seems like as part of that, or maybe in addition to that, one of the things that MAPSIT can work on is increasing awareness in the community about geologic mapping and the value of geologic mapping. It seems like in my experience on review panels specifically, that there seems to be somewhat of a disconnect for the geophysicist or for the chemist or something about what it means to make a geologic map, what geologic maps are for. One of the only ways you're going to bridge that is to kind of increase awareness in the community. So a lot of the findings that you have seem to be somewhat specific to increasing training and interaction within the planetary mapping community. But it seems like MAPSIT might want to brainstorm about ways to increase the general awareness of planetary mapping and how maps are created and what maps are used for in the broader planetary community. And I don't have any obvious suggestions on the best way to do that, but that might be something brainstorming.
Yeah,
I don't think really you'll necessarily have a lot more success in review panels until a lot more of this very, very diverse community has a broader recommendation of what the value of geologic mapping is.
I agree completely, and that's a very good point. I'm glad you brought it up there. The one way that comes to my mind immediately is because geologic mapping is a scientific investigation. Geologic maps are tools that we use to figure out the geologic evolution of planetary surface. That is when you are doing a geologic investigation that will result in a geologic map, perhaps it would behoove some of us mappers to include like a geophysicist or a chemist as a member of our proposal team, as a funded co-I. And then through the regular meetings one has, as one develops a geologic map, insight on the geophysics of an object or the geochemistry or something. And so they can see the development and appreciate how the mapping process is aiding to understanding it. That seems to be an inclusive way of bringing that part of the community in to help increase their awareness of how maps are working. So I'm glad you made it, and that's what I just said is possibly one idea. There's probably many others, so we would welcome such input. Yeah, Brent, you had a comment.
Yeah, sure. It's Brett Argonal from USGS. I just had a comment on your last slide here about mapping priorities, in the sense that, and I'll talk about this when I talk about foundational data products. I think one issue is, do we have the final base maps for bodies before we map them? I think even in some cases where things are listed in progress, the base maps haven't been finalized yet. So, and I realize there needs to be a balance. You don't want to wait forever to do geologic mapping. You want to do it when it's important, when people are still around working on the mission and so on. But there needs to be some sort of iterative process or process to maybe some final mapping needs to be done, especially at larger scales and higher resolution, so that the final products, the base products get made before you do a lot of mapping. And that's not happening for some of these bodies, or at least there is much newer data like for Phobos and Deimos, or even for started full control of mosaics and Titan, but those are not funded now and not being finished. So, and some of the other icy movements of Saturn, there have been maps made but not published. So there's a sort of conflict here, or a discussion that needs to take place to make sure the base maps, the reference frame information, sufficient resolution at least for the geologic mapping project.
I agree 100%, and it behooves us, those who particularly would like to make a global geologic map of any one of these bodies, to make sure that the necessary base map data products, the controlled mosaics, or at least are close to being done. And I can attest to this personally, because when I proposed the global geologic map of Io, I couldn't get started until year 2, because in year 1, the USGS had to make the combined Galileo Voyager mosaics that actually Paul Geisler and Tammy Becker produced, and Brent was the one who did the control point network for that. So because now it's published, but yeah, it's definitely useful that we have whatever base map products we need, whether it's for these, particularly for these global maps, or for anything else, have that actually produced. So people interested in doing this type of mapping, let's communicate, let's get the planetary data products in time for the map. So I agree, there needs to be that two-way communication on all of it.
Thanks.
We're going to go ahead and move on. Between now and about 9:30, we'll have Janie Radabach come back up to the podium and talk a little bit about other community discussions and input.
Okay, this will be pretty quick. This is just a couple of other things that are coming up, and then also I just want to hear from people if there are other things you know of as well. So we just heard, well, okay, so first of all, there is a talk that will be given at the European Planetary Science Conference in Latvia in September about MAPSIT. I think that's right. Dave, do you call it MAPSIT? I haven't looked at the final, but it's essentially, or is it PSDI, or who can remember?
Which session are you referring to?
The one at European Planetary Science Conference in Latvia.
Oh, the exact.
The details. Okay, so I think it might be about MAPSIT, but also about planetary spatial data, which Andrew's here, right? Sorry, I keep forgetting. Very good. So, and you'll be presenting that, is that right? Yeah, good. Okay. That's really good. We're communicating with the European community about this, and moving ahead, so that would be really good. Is there anything else you have to add about that? Okay, thank you. Is anybody going to that meeting? Who else? Yeah. Good. Okay. Latvia sounds really cool. Yeah. All right. So then also we just heard yesterday that we have a special session approved in the fall in New Orleans on planetary spatial data infrastructure. Jay's leading that. This is pretty exciting that we have this, but you know, we never know if we really have it. So, so we really want people to submit to this session, and we're trying to think about ways to strategize for that. So if you have ideas, if you have people you think would be really good to talk about this. We actually have some invited slots maybe, so let's think about this and make sure that we have a good turnout so that we don't do posters over the border. It'd be nice if we actually have a follow-up session. And what's really good about that is there's a good spatial data infrastructure community, as we mentioned, AGU, and we are talking with them and trying to get some involvement with them as well. Great, so we need some participation on that. That would be really good. Everyone, please keep your eyes open for roadmap drafts that will be circulating this fall for comment, and we'll talk more about the roadmap later on today. And then a couple of things to think about there. The Cassini end of mission is happening in September, and they would like to create some data products. And so, as we were talking about before, is that the truth is they won't be able to do much with their current funding. They did say, hey, we would like to create some things for you, and so there was a list. We said, well, we probably won't be able to do most of those. So anyway, but they do want to. They have a community poll for the desires out, and I'm sorry you can't read that because there's a hyperlink on it. And it is still open for comment. So if there's anything that you are interested in having the Cassini project make for you, I think that'd be really good. The thing is that there is a scientist at JPL for accessibility, Paolo Penciato, and there is a kind of a group at JPL that's tasked with, hey, take these data and make it usable. And he said there's 10 times the work that's there that they could actually possibly do. So this is sort of the canary in the coal mine for me. A little bit is this microcosm of JPL where, wait, we've got all these data, and so let's make sure everybody can use it, and they can't even begin to touch the amount of work that they need to do to make that happen. So, so anyway, I will stay close with them and talk to them more about those things. Anybody else can think of that's coming up, or that they have they're thinking about sort of general maps that related or community analysis. The publication that just got accepted was, so we actually have one that's coming out that Jay Lara led about planetary spatial data infrastructure. It was just accepted today, I think. This is really good. What's the journal again?
International Journal of Geoinformation.
Okay, geoinformation, good. So that also touches that community.
It's open access.
And it will be open access, good. So we'll make sure to distribute that really widely. It's got a really good way of laying out what PSDI is, and I think it'd be good for everybody to take a look at that. And we'll send out around.
Yeah. I forget when the Mars Human Landing Site next meeting is. Community is interested in these topics, so they want to make sure that infrastructural things for supporting the human landing site selection process and landing that they get input from MAPSIT, and they get kind of approved by MAPSIT.
Anything else?
It's probably not too early to mention LPSC. You probably noticed over the last couple of years at LPSC, we've had several members of MAPSIT who ended up being on the steering committee, and we're able to get somewhat special sessions for PSDI related topics at LPSC. I think we'll probably try another time to do a real special session again this year. But one thing that you may not have noticed about LPSC and the abstract submissions, and now in the dropdown, there's a topic that is planetary spatial data infrastructure. So presented here this week, feel free to submit that to the AGU conference in December, but then also LPSC, which we all know I think will have a January deadline of some sort. So definitely feel free to propose to that or submit to that, and make sure you do the PSDI dropdown.
Yeah, that dropdown is like gold to have gotten, and thanks Sam Lawrence for that. But it's really hard to sort of remove yourself from the dropdown once we're in, so I think that's really good. Anything else? Okay.
Speaker is Justin Heckerty, who will talk about PSDI and why we need it.
Morning, everybody. Kicking around. Like I said, really appreciate it. Wasn't sure how many people were going to show up today, so we have a really nice audience, so thank you very much for coming. Again, my name is Justin Haggerty. Today I'll be talking about planetary spatial data infrastructure. We've heard it throughout the week. We've already mentioned it a lot today. What does it really mean, though? There's still a lot of confusion, and so hopefully by the end of today, we'll have a little bit of more information about why we need it, why you need it. Here earlier in the week, you probably saw a really nice presentation by Ross Beyer, who did a great job of outlining the general concepts of PSDI and what it means within the context of NASA and NASA goals. Basically, a lot of people are still having a hard time in trying to understand exactly what PSDI is. So again, hopefully what we'll be doing today is provide a little bit more context for all of you regarding PSDI. And in order for me to do that, I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the key terms that we find aren't really firmly defined throughout the planetary community. A little discussion about some of the common issues that we find that planetary scientists tend to have when dealing with spatial data. About what it is that the PSDI really is and what it means for you. What is it that it can do to help us work with planetary spatial data? That will then lead into some specific examples of success from the terrestrial community. And then I'll talk a little bit about the goals and the benefits of PSDI to you, the user. So, reeled in with line and sinker, we'll talk a little bit then about how you can help us with implementing PSDI at the next stages. Spatial data. I think a lot of people in this community, in this room in particular, probably have a strong sense of what spatial data actually mean. But when we're talking to a lot of folks in the planetary community, we find that there's not really often a firm definition of what one person means by spatial data. And so when we're talking about spatial data, what we're referring to are locational or spatial component and some sort of common reference frame. So something like a coordinate system. So in the realm of planetary sciences, what we're really mostly talking about are remotely sensed data that have some sort of spatial component. So things like digital terrain models, elevation models, things like map projected image mosaics, and even planetary geologic maps. We talked a lot about that already today. Further, there's other data products that we typically refer to as spatial data products. This includes foundational data products, which Brent Arkin will talk about a little bit later this morning. Things like ortho images, controlled mosaics. That then breaks down to another level, which is framework data products, which tend to be a little more science specific. So things like mineralogy or global element maps of planetary surfaces. Now it's all well and good to go ahead and talk about these data products and to be aware of what they are, but really what a lot of people are mostly interested in when they're doing the science are science-ready data products. And so what does it mean when we talk about science-ready data products? In addition to being accessible, we're talking about products that are accurate, co-registered, interoperable, they have known error, and they can be reproduced through standardized methods of some sort. Products like that, that's what a lot of people want to use to conduct the robust science, and that's what we're really trying to talk about, are these types of data products. For a minute while I make this interactive and wake everybody up for a second, I swear it's just for this one slide. If you use any of these data products or data products similar to those, please raise your hand. Okay, good. So, how many of you who work with these data products have ever had issues either finding them, accessing them, using them, getting them to operate on your system, or using them to interact with any other kind of data products? Okay, good. So there are some experts out there, but a lot of others are having issues, like myself, actually. One of the things that we're talking about, though, is when we're talking to the data community, is one thing that we hear over and over and over again are that people feel like they are not spatial data experts, yet they feel like they need to be in order to work with the data products. That's just one thing, things related to data products. We hear, I want to be able to get everything all in one place, or there's just too many tools to choose from, I don't know what to use, or there's too many uncommunicated expectations, I don't know what you're supposed to be doing, I don't know what I'm supposed to be doing. So software is too complex or too expensive. Again, too hard to find what I'm looking for. Everyone wants to find everything in one place. Too many data formats to worry about. Which ones do we use? Why do we use them? Which gets into questions about standard formats and making sure they're enforced along with the policies. And then also duplication of effort. A lot of people doing the exact same things without talking to each other, or possibly even too much effort. One thing, again, I just wanted to focus on again is the one in the middle, the issue of being a spatial data expert. In a realm of a planetary spatial data infrastructure, ideally, the spatial data should just work, right? You shouldn't have to, as a non-expert, the non-spatial data experts, you shouldn't have to be an expert in spatial data processing in order to find the data, use it, and make scientific interpretations based on that. So ideally, a geologist, for example, shouldn't have to go and become a spatial data processing expert in order to get the data products that they need in order to do the science that they want to do. So in essence, the PSDI becomes effectively like an easy button, right? But you want to be a little careful with the easy buttons. You don't want it to turn into a black box. You have a black box, right? You stop paying attention to the data. You don't know about the quality of the data. You don't know where it comes from. You don't know how it's generated. And you're not familiar with the data. Effectively, you have garbage. And then if you have garbage in, we all know that you get garbage out. So the point here is that you want to be very cognizant of the data you're working with, but we need to find a mechanism of doing that. How do we know the quality of the data products that we're working with individually or as a community? How do we know that somebody else is working with the quote-unquote right data products? Thankfully, a lot of us in this community are already doing this, whether it's institutions or individuals. People are actually doing a phenomenal job of producing, archiving, and disseminating high-quality data products, science-ready data products. A lot of those examples you see right here. We talked a little bit about that already. And a lot of this is happening in an ad hoc fashion, meaning that somebody identified a need and they started working on this because they had to. Not because there was some overarching mechanism that said, hey, we're all going to do this together. But what if I told you that there is this overarching mechanism, this entity that allows all of these entities to work together to produce the benefits of having high-quality data products that are going to facilitate the data and the science? That's where this whole concept of planetary spatial data structure comes in, data infrastructure comes in. It's this overarching mechanism. And so we've heard a lot about PSDI throughout the week, through today. You'll hear more about it through the rest of the talks today. But again, it's this overarching mechanism that really basically provides the community support of multiple components of our community. This includes things like data, being able to access the data, the policies and the standards needed to enforce the data or to use the data on a common platform. And then it also needs to take into account you, the users, all of us. Robust PSDI basically is one that is going to place bounds on the scope of the spatial data ecosystem. We don't want to focus on too small of an area, and we don't want it to be too broad either. We want it to be just right. We also want to make sure that we identify the thematic components and how they relate to one another. We want to formalize the previously ad hoc methodologies to make sure that we are doing this by implementation of standards and common community platforms. Week, I think the PDS folks did a great job of talking about the importance of communication. Communication is hugely important, and we're finding, as you'll hear today, that we're really struggling to really communicate with you, the community, about the importance of what we're trying to do here. Once you formalize these community platforms, the idea is that you have community scale discussions, and you can ask things like, what data do we want to collect? How do we go about collecting those data? And then what do we do with the data once we've collected it? So communication, being important. Important right now for us to be talking about what PSDI is, as it is for us to be talking about what PSDI is not. And so we already had a little bit of an advertisement earlier that Lisa, she'll be talking later in the session about the distinction between PSDI and PDS and how they relate to one another. The points I want to get across to you today is that this whole concept of spatial data infrastructure is not unique. It's not a novel concept. The terrestrial science community has been doing this for decades. On the left are some examples of people all over the world who've been developing spatial data infrastructures. On the right, it just talks a little bit about the various different levels of SDIs within the terrestrial science community. You've got local, state, regional, national, global. And basically what we're seeing here is that at the local level, focus on the technology of the collection and storage, but then up at the upper levels, you're seeing a lot of communication regarding standards and interoperability and policies, with the idea of having a very nice vertical integration between all of those components, making sure that they work together. In short, is that the terrestrial community has been doing this for decades. They've already learned a lot of lessons. We feel here. So let's learn a lot of the lessons that they've already learned and apply them to what we're doing. If you were here, you probably saw Ross give a great presentation again on this concept, this general concept of this 5-component diagram. Basically, the terrestrial community has boiled down this concept to this simple diagram. And so we have the very important components of data access standards. One thing that wasn't in Ross's slide was the concept of technology, which basically is enveloping of all of this. Facilitator for the discovery, access, and exploitation of data. Now again, throughout this week, we talked about a lot of these things. We talked about data, we talked about the tools or the data access methodologies and the standards, and even a little bit about policies. The one thing we haven't talked that much about is people. And that's one thing that I think is the most important about this whole thing, because if we don't deliver what the people want, or if we don't have people involved, we're sort of failing ourselves here. The people component is most important because if you focus on that, you start to really develop those critical skills for developing and supporting PSDI. Communication avenues so that you can engage the stakeholders, the people that want to and need to use the data. But then you also have to develop these techniques to connect with the new and or non-expert users. Now, it's important to note that we're not just focusing on the new or non-expert users, we are focusing on everybody in this room, everybody in our community. Hearing this, my guess is that a lot of this sounds instinctively to you like, yeah, that makes lots of sense. But you might be asking yourselves, why should I care? Well, I'm glad you all asked that question because we do have some goals and benefits here. Now, this is not an exhaustive list, clearly, but I just want to run through some of these very briefly. If you have a robust PSDI, what we're talking about is it'll lead to improved discoverability and accessibility of science-ready data products, confidence in the accuracy and interoperability of those spatial data products. It leads to the development and maintenance of community-wide standards and best practices, and increased efficiencies, and ultimately leading to the facilitation of science and decision-making. The development and support of the infrastructure leading to a shared understanding, this knowledge pyramid that we've seen a couple of times throughout the week. And then formalized communication platforms for channelized communication to get community input. Now it's this last bullet that's actually been the most difficult, perhaps unsurprisingly. And so when we've been trying to communicate over the past 2 years with the community about PSDI, what it is and its importance, have lots of confusion and lots of hesitance, and I've not understood why. It's really kind of been driving me crazy. And it turns out that this diagram really turned around my perception of why we were having such a hard time with this. Now, I realize there's a lot there. There's not, you don't need to read everything on here. The diagram is showing is it's based on decades worth of terrestrial science expertise, and then showing the most robust way of trying to implement infrastructure or spatial data infrastructure. So basically, you start all the way over to the left at the awareness stage, and that's when the community en masse starts to identify, hey, there's an issue here. All of us are experiencing this issue. We need to work together to figure this out. Or, now in our instance, we can take advantage of the terrestrial community who has already identified a lot of these things, and so we're aware that this already exists. Knowledge structure phase, infrastructure phase, where you do a community self-assessment, and the community says, okay, what do we already have? What's lacking? What do we need to do? Communicate it to some governing body, in our instance, NASA, who then aligns that with some of their goals and starts to come up with ideas for how you fund some of these opportunities. Persuasion stage, which you then have members of NASA or advisory groups to NASA who then go to the community to demonstrate the key aspects of PSDI and what it can do to help them. That then allows the individual user, all of you, to make a decision about whether or not you want to adopt a PSDI or whether you don't. A decision to implement or adopt the PSDI, that then leads to increased participation. You have buy-in. You then feel like you're a valuable community contributor to the overall effort. That leads to greater participation, and that leads to greater utilization of the PSDI. Now, like I said, this is the way it's supposed to work, but we've been having a hard time getting a lot of buy-in on this. And it wasn't until I saw this diagram that I recognized that myself and a lot of other maps it right into the middle. We said, hey, let's start with the alignment and persuasion phase and start heading off to the right with kind of ignoring everything that needed to happen off to the left. That's not to say we haven't been trying, but it hasn't been a coordinated effort. And so starting with this talk and a lot of the other talks you'll see over the next few days, up a little bit and try and redefine some of these other things earlier in this communications diagram and start going the other way. In order for us to do this, though, we're going to need a lot of input from all of you. And so community input is absolutely critical. discussion panel a little bit later today, and hopefully we'll get a lot of input from you about issues you've been having, things that you'd like to see change, products that you need. My hope is that throughout this week, we've all gained a lot of knowledge, and that knowledge that we've all gained is extraordinarily important. And why is that? And that's because knowing is half the battle, right? If you're not a connoisseur of 1980s cartoons, and you don't know, this is from G.I. Joe, a public service announcement in the 1980s. It is an aspiring scientist. I was like, wow, knowledge, this is awesome, everybody loves this. The thing that always drove me crazy about this, though, is knowing is half the battle is, what was the other half of the battle? And so when I was looking for this diagram, I went online and I found the answer. The other half of the battle is 25% red lasers and 25% blue lasers. So, now you know. Okay, so summary, really quickly, I just have another minute here. Hopefully today I've shown you that PSDI is this theoretical framework for community support, making sure we all work together. It's not a canned solution. It's a mechanism to help ID spatial data products, data practitioners, and data interoperability, ultimately leading to supporting the broadest possible user base so that we can facilitate science and exploration. We are in the beginning stages of this communication. We're on the left side of that communication arrow. We want to be on the right side. In order to do that, we're going to need help from all of you. The discussion panel, we talked about the AGU special session. We also have now this paper that Jay did a great job leading that will serve as a reference. So if you don't remember everything I said today, it's basically in that paper. So we'll send that out for everybody to take a look at. Feel free to contact myself or any of the other MAPSIC members if you have any questions. And in the meantime, I'll just say thank you very much for your attention.
50 seconds ahead of the time, and that's awesome. Do we have any questions or comments? Ray?
Slides, they're beautiful. The problem I'm having is I could take those slides and take out your words of the PDF.
Sure.
So how are they different?
Lisa will be talking about that a little bit later today, but I think a lot of people have been basically saying that PDS plays a crucial role in the overall initiative that we're trying to do. What PSDI is doing is broadening the horizons even further and making sure that everyone's involved from the lowest stages all the way up to the upper stages. And then we're working communicatively with NASA headquarters, with NASA, with mission leaders, with practitioners within the community, with people outside the community, the terrestrial community. It's a coordinated effort that formalizes a lot of the things that are already happening and making sure we're all talking to each other. Yes. Formalized communication amongst the entire community.
And broadening the scope.
Yes.
Yeah, going back to your interactive slide,
Yes.
where you mentioned we want the science 3D products, and you mentioned a few things. And along those part of your slides, one thing that I probably hidden in it, but you never mentioned, is actually the review of these products. And on that, and I'm working on that with the planetary science archive, but is the problem of all that we have with the data later on because of reviews that we don't do in the proper way or the lack of review of the products. And I mean, being provocative a bit, like rather than doing all this infrastructure, if we just do like proper review, we will not solve the problem.
Yes, and in my opinion, that the review process falls under the auspices of the concept of standards and policies and that sort of thing. Unless you have mechanisms to set up the review process to make sure it's properly funded and all those sorts of things. But explicitly like that is 100% correct. That is a major part of the whole process. So thanks for saying that. Appreciate it.
Any other comments or questions? I wish I had a gong, Justin, but.
We got one next door.
Yeah, we did. We seem to have lost it though, and that's possibly a good thing. But yeah, we can certainly cheer and clap and so on, but very much for your time. It's time for a break, I believe. Come back at 10 o'clock, and we'll see you shortly.
Is that gone?
It didn't sound like it. It's getting better. That's why you were sick.
Well, they don't. Yeah, have a chance to talk to you. One thing I wanted to ask you is one of the things that I'm looking for is for I think we talked about that seminar. I know a lot of our students. So what I wanted to do was be able to find out things like ISIS workshops.
Oh, hey, okay, sorry, did you hear okay?
Annual.
Yeah.
Okay, good.
Anyway,
Yeah,
what it is, I'd like to.
be on for a little bit while, so we got a break for about 15 minutes.
And so then we have seminars.
Yes, we can send you a paper right now, so meeting on there.
Actually, I like this idea. So this isn't like every year. So
No, obviously,
maybe
don't.
we can find it. You could host and you have a lot more students. So make it to mix. If it's not expensive like this one, then obviously it's going to be easier. So maybe the odd, I don't know if we're going to do this, but maybe the odd years. I'd be happy to come down.
There's one thing that I noticed is, I mean, all the emphasis is on one example of science and mathematics. Talk to a lot of students. More projections.
Well, so I mean, so I think Ray's missing with PDS doesn't give us and doesn't give us right. And it also even if they do have the right products, it doesn't mean that they're always working. And if they don't work,
No, I figured I'm gonna kick it off and.
And so this structure was meant to be more dynamic and hey, GIS is dead. What else do we need to do? Okay, so we have the capability to transfer.
We had like reflections and
So right now, the only reason why PDS data works in ArcMap is because someone, we took the time to but that didn't happen in the PDS. You can take it. That didn't happen. The PDS didn't do that. Somebody else did. That's what the SGI, PSGI is supposed to facilitate is what are the gaps that PDS can't do and are not funded to do such that it makes the data easier to use. I mean, another prime example is if we could get all the data to the cloud, Amazon cloud, and then you can stand up ISIS next to it and have it access it. Nobody downloads it. Right. So, but then everybody could just run a machine next to all that data in the cloud and process it like it's their own machine. So the PDS would have to pay for the price of getting the data there once it's or SDI would have to pay the price to get it. So that doesn't mean that that's feasible now, but that could be feasible in 5 years. And PDS is not going to be that. So PDS is not going to have live services that allow you to stream the data. Even though PDS is supporting some of the WMS, WCCS stuff, not really. It's more grassroots, and that's kind of what this is for. I think. So, but it also is a training. PDS is a training. So I'd see that as part of the SDI.
Having said that, is one of the things that the artists kind of, I don't know if I want to say come on fire, but just kind of, what do you guys want? It used to be people archives, people.
Yeah. Well, and so actually, I mean, did we? I think the ARPA would be that place that provides those data sources, not training and actually lots of technical challenging stuff like databases. So instead of having all these ad hoc places, and instead of PDS getting pushed another thing, we could, the end result of this thing could be, hey, we have our business, let's push all the technology there. That means a lot more money and a lot more responsibility. But that gives it all.
I've always seen that the science stuff here, they want to be able to work.
Yeah.
I think there's an interface.
Yeah.
We understand the data. We also know how to present it to the student. And provide services to them. That was kind of where I was getting.
I mean, Justin has always talked a lot about how can the architects make the transition to more. I think maps it's kind of at, what do we train? Is it theoretic or is it, we train how to deal with the data, we train how to use it, we train geologic mappers. I think we need to find that out.
Yeah, I think you can decide measures, because it's a very basic thing. So we take CS.
What does that mean?
Yeah, you have a tool map.
Yeah. Is that mapping? Is that I rise in?
Or is it just pure program?
Yeah.
I'm only learning the tools, not the application. So there's different aspects.
So I think these kind of training ideas are good for maps just to kind of lay out in the roadmap. Not only do we have to make the data more accessible than the PDS can be, or we have to do, but we have to make sure that people understand how to use it, or even what it is. What is it? That doesn't work for me. Why doesn't it work for me? So I like it. I'm sorry, I need to. Well, and I'll try to bring it up at one of the discussions as far as one of the ideas is understand how to use it. I think those are good topics. And Justin's already, he loves talking about that, obviously.
Send me an email with us at conference. Oh, sure.
That's
Okay, please have a seat, and we'll get going on the next talk. Lucas Day on the NASA USGS Planetary Spatial Data Infrastructure Interagency Agreement, or IAA.
I just turn on? Yep. Okay. I think I get the award for a title that has nothing but acronyms in it. So the first thing I'll do is try to define those acronyms. I'm sure you know some of them. We all know now that PSCI doesn't mean the Democrazia d'Italia, and IAA doesn't mean the place where you get to see all the new cool cars with interagency agreement. But I'll talk about what that really means and what those are, and what we're doing under this agreement right now, and then where we're going. And so this is a little different than the other talks about more generally where we want to go and so forth. This is going to get into the nuts and bolts of some of the things. But before diving into that, I think everybody knows NASA. You've seen those green-shirted people around. Astrogeology, where your work is a special intersection between NASA and USGS. And all the problems we work on and the money, well, at least 95% of it comes from NASA. So we're working on stuff for NASA, but the people are USGS, the expertise, the culture is all USGS. So there have been many times questions about why aren't we part of NASA? As an agency, we have a different philosophy than NASA. NASA is boldly go and discover new things. USGS is trust our products. You know, we do it right. And so it's just a different way of, the culture is quite different. But there's this intersection where we work together. PSDA, you've seen all this before. I'll just go over really quickly that everybody here wants to get data over to the users. You're working on tools to do that. making those tools is absolutely no fun if there's no standards, so that people making the tools. And there's no point having standards if there aren't some policies and some enforcement to make sure that they get used. So this whole package together is the simplest way to think about a PSDI is. It's the infrastructure, the ecosystem within which you can get data to the users effectively. And so what's an interagency agreement? The federal government don't do contracts, they do agreements, but for people on the outside, it's effectively a contract between two agencies about how to get some work done. And obviously you can only do things that Congress or the President has said to go do, but sometimes questions to go do something, and they don't have the expertise in-house to do it, so they turn to another agency to get it done. Another example of an interagency agreement is between NASA and the Department of Energy. RTGs, they need plutonium for it. NASA doesn't have people who make plutonium. The Department of Energy does, so there's an agreement between the two agencies for DOE to produce the plutonium that NASA needs. And I was going to put a picture here of the seven samurai, but that puts NASA in the position of being a bunch of squabbling peasants. So I turn to the other half of my heritage in the 1300s when the King of Hungary needed things done, going to all the nobles and hoping they would give them an army to go do things didn't work. He just paid some money out. And it was one of the first professional armies that stood up and just took care of a few things. When he was done, all right. So that's the idea of interagency agreement is professional experts at getting what you need done, get it done, move on. And so that's an interagency agreement. Now, this particular one between NASA and USGS to work on PSDI is a successor to what was called the Planetary Cartography Program, which sat under PG&G. And there are many problems with this previous arrangement that, on the one hand, was very successful and went on for, we actually have a hard time finding when it started, but way over a decade. And tons of great stuff got done under it. But programmatically, it was a little strange. It was a program within a program. It was a program that anybody could propose to, except it never showed up in roses. There's no way for people to apply to it. It did happen on rare occasion, many, many years ago, that somebody put in a proposal other than the USGS. It just really didn't work. Then there's this review panel. What was its job? Tried to set it up to be like a regular RNA program review panel, except also reviewing all the progress reports. I mean, we just don't do that. Your MDAP progress reports don't go to a review panel to get looked at. That's strange in terms of the details of how the program was run. And then over the last several years, we had a more or less arbitrary cost cap because afford only a certain amount, wanted it nice and fixed. And there was no relationship between the work that needed to be done and the amount of money available. And that made things start to happen. So this agreement is a straightforward agreement between NASA and USGS for 5 years for USGS to provide support, and the top part of it is very broad, just help out with this kind of planetary spatial data infrastructure. So the way I look at it, you see various all over the place. There's tons of good stuff happening under PSDI within the blob and things attached to it and hanging around close to it. It's not organized from the top in some coherent fashion. And this IAA is an easy way for NASA to USGS to go fill in some of the gaps. So it's a weird amoeba. As things grow and change, the shape of that amoeba and the size of it can grow or shrink as needed. To me, that's the easiest way to think about what it is. These IAs can't last more than 5 years. I mean, it's a thing that gets set up, you get it done, and then you move on. You can get another IAA to do similar things later on, but there should not be a permanent hose from one agency into another for money. That's not the idea here. There needs to be a well-defined thing to go take care of. And there's a part that's very broad about what we need to do. And then the interesting details go into what's called the Part B, the second part. And we discuss and negotiate this year by year. So the old Carter program, we tried to put in 3, 4, 5-year proposals. Different things would go for different lengths. This is year by year. So every year we can reprioritize and adjust course on what gets done under the IAA. Progress reports, again, this gives us chances to adjust. Under the old Carter program, we tried to have a mid-year, but it really does function as these quarterly reviews. One of the common problems we have, or used to have without these type of progress reports, is that a bunch of work was optimistically hoped to be done in September, because that's the last year of the fiscal year, last month of the fiscal year. And there'd be unpleasant surprises at the very end about what got done and what didn't get done. In terms of working under this current IAA, FY16, so last fiscal year was basically a test to make sure we had the administrative parts working. We had a very little piece of money in there. And that was the last year of the Carter being funded under PGG. So that ramped down. And this year is the first year we're actually working in a real fashion under this. This is showing you all the different tasks, and each one of them has a long list of deliverables underneath. I think we got about 15 pages of deliverables that make up the full Part B. You probably can't read all the details. And we're trying to figure out how much detail. We don't want to hide this. But a lot of this, if you'll see, at the top level at least, I'll run through it, is infrastructure and the data access stuff. So things like first up, the Mercator lab, so the GIS lab that Trent runs, the digital photogrammetry workstation, so the lab where we do socket set work and people can come and use our workstations. And the RPIPs, these are basic things where people from all over can come and use. They're funded out of this agreement. Mostly set by the IAU. We also try to follow for geologic mapping, the national standards for work on terrestrial mapping as much as possible. But there needs to be some interface. The nomenclature webpage, for example, that's actually run by USGS staff paid out of this agreement. You all know the geologic mapping. We don't do the bulk of the mapping, but the whole program, the website, and keeping the process going, that is done by USGS staff, again, paid out of this agreement. So this is real infrastructure stuff. Software development, a lot of this is the ISIS 3, but there's other things under here. In particular, this year we have a significant chunk of money to fund the transition from socket set to socket GXP. There's a whole bunch of that need to be converted, and we're wrapping that up. As you saw, hopefully the demo yesterday, one of our biggest efforts under there is the IPSI, the ability to make control networks in a more user-friendly way. This camera model architecture is also a really important one. That's where we're doing the research and starting to work with the community sensor model instead of individual camera models for each sensor. And that's a international standard. If all the planetary camera models are using that standard, there's a whole bunch of different software packages that will be able to use that camera model. So we'll have to keep building them. Already uses that. So products. This is one of the things that got squeezed out in the past. We're making, and some of those products, we're making a paper thing you can go out and look at with, for the messenger topography as well as a prettier digital one. This is looking a lot like the moon product we made recently. Working on the Themis control mosaics, Themis day and night, controlling those mosaics, putting all the pixels in the right place. There's a bunch of community engagement stuff being paid for. There's a bit of kitchen sink stuff too once you get a big agreement like this. We can't actually go to the regular RNA review panels without being paid by some mechanism. And they stuffed that in under here. Our postdocs are under here, and there's a bunch of working in this environment internally for us. So we've got a little bit of funding to help us kick over that. And the sum total for all that is $4 million. We are in discussions with NASA about what we should do. And we're talking about a number of $4.5 million. And I think the key things is the changes. At the 7% up, we're 7% of, I guess this number is, the change is probably the most important. We're reducing how much goes into management of personnel. We're upping the postdoc funding to include funding for graduate students. We're going to start doing graduate student internships, but we're pulling out all the internal funding. We're going to pay for that ourselves instead of asking NASA to foot the bill as a community engagement, holding steady. Products, this is what we really had squeezed out. We're bumping that back up. We're trying to get back into the business of making products for people that the community needs. Software is going up a little bit, and then it's a 7% increase, so basically holding steady on the standards and the infrastructure part. And the last slide is, if you, I guess I put in one more. Let's see. So the longer term picture is, should be reasonably stable. What we want to do in the longer term is evolve standards to more closely match those of the terrestrial communities that do spatial data infrastructure as well. We want to keep evolving. Throw away ISIS 3 and make something new, but keep evolving and improving our photogrammetry and photometry tools. And we're returning to the business of making the most difficult, I'll call them ortho image products. That means controlled, that means they need topography. You can't make an ortho product without topography. Work with HEOMD. Right now, this is all being paid for out of the Planetary Science Division. Clearly, HEOMD gets a lot of benefit out of it. And we want to be as transparent and responsive as we can, so we're showing you all this. But at the same time, we can only do what NASA tells us to do under this kind of agreement. And so if you want something else done here, going back to the medieval process, you can talk to us. You can try talking to the King NASA headquarters directly. But the recommended process is there's a court here. It's called MAPSIT. They're the ones that have the official job of going and talking to headquarters about what we should and shouldn't be doing. So, any questions?
Comments?
Russ Byers, City Institute. So I'll ask this question before Amini does. Who sets the direction for what gets done under the IAA? Is NASA hands that to you and they get it from MAPSIT? And how long does it take that cycle to close?
So in an ideal world, there would be a MAPSIT document that shows the priorities and some subset of that that's not getting done through other, what NASA would direct us to do. Currently, since that document doesn't exist, we negotiating directly with NASA and suggesting what we think needs done, and they can agree or disagree. And they have some priorities that we're not aware of on occasion, and sometimes they weren't aware of.
So you expect that mechanism to evolve?
Yes.
And then my second question is, who reviews, what's the review mechanism for this The review mechanism for the previous process, as you mentioned, was strange. What's the review mechanism for the new process?
So technically speaking, for an IAA, there is no external review. So what we're trying to do is to put it out in the open. You can see what is happening under this agreement so that you can say, collect all your comments, funnel it to MAPSIT, and MAPSIT will talk to headquarters. And again, this process isn't fully stood up yet, but the idea is the way it should work is we will talk about what we think is going to the IAA ahead of time. So there's time to talk to MAPSIT, and MAPSIT can go, wait a minute, we don't like the direction next year. Critical is missing, or you're putting too much effort into something we don't really need.
Thanks, Laz. Jane, make it clear quick. Laz, you mentioned that there's no, I guess, direct pipeline or ongoing fire hose between both of these agencies. But I guess I'm confused about how, USGS astrogeology is doing work that mainly benefits NASA, and so it seems like NASA would want to have some way to continually funnel money there, and it worries me, I guess, that this could just disappear in 5 years.
No, the way the government's set up, Congress does not want to give to one agency magically keep going somewhere they didn't send it. So you can't set up a permanent thing where this is a mechanism for NASA to guarantee and report back to higher ups that this thing still needs to exist.
And you see that probably continuing.
Given that this has gone on for 50 years, it's not going away. But this particular agreement is going to have to be reviewed every 5 years, and it's built in that it has to be looked at again.
In the interest of time, let's go ahead and have the next speaker, who will be Brent Arkenall, talking about foundational products for PSDI.
Okay, so I'll be discussing one aspect that we've been talking about today, the planetary spatial data infrastructure, the foundational data products. And I'd like to acknowledge my colleagues here who helped in the past discussions in getting this presentation ready. And I'll note that there's no actual abstract for this meeting, but we talked about the same subject pretty much at LPSC. Jay Laura gave a talk there, and you can see the abstract cited there. That really talks about this if you want to review text that discusses this. To go ahead, the basic idea here that I'll keep repeating is this is a part of any SDI having foundational data products, and in particular we'll discuss how this is part of a planetary spatial data infrastructure. And I'll give, at least so it's not all abstract, one example of what could be done for the moon, even not necessarily a final example, but an example of how to even get started in thinking about this process. So the foundation of foundational data products is that they're, again, and there have been several other presentations that I hope you've seen some of, particularly Justin's today, about what is an SDI, what is a PSDI, and I'll be referring back to what we used in those presentations to try to emphasize this is only the data, and what you do with it is only one part of the whole superstructure of an SDI. It may be the part that, frankly, I and other people may be most interested in is making data products and making them available and doing science analysis of them, but it's only one aspect of any SDI. So this isn't, you shouldn't take an entirely data-centric view that that's the core of everything here. So data products exist for a reason, and those reasons have to be real and have to be thought out, what the needs are, whether there's research or exploration needs, what the products be used for, and even going back to how and when you collect the data and so on. So identifying these foundational data products should be a community process, and hopefully by maps it to decide for every body in the solar system, or at least every mission that collects data of a given body, what are the foundational data sets, and how do you build from there to other data sets, and more importantly, how do you build from there to get results in terms of science or new exploration information. So the fallback here is to the terrestrial example, as you heard a little bit in Justin's talk, that really where these ideas started some 20, 30 years ago. And there's even some of the documents that I'm going to mention that started as early as 1910, some of these ideas in the US government. For example, there's something called the OMB Circular 816 that started back early in the 20th century in different revisions. Example that we can still follow now from terrestrial data. And the idea is that there is a US spatial data infrastructure. There's certainly other ones, as you heard in the examples, as foundational data sets and framework data sets. And I'll go on here to explain the details of foundational, but for example, framework data sets are pretty much any spatial data set you can think of. The terrestrial examples, some of them are things that would probably not happen in planetary science, such as housing and urban population and land use and so on. But there are other ones such as geology and craters or whatever that might actually be their own layers in a framework infrastructure or mineralogical mapping or whatever that we do use. But the foundational data sets that transfer directly terrestrial use to planetary use are the three listed here at the bottom. You need a coordinate system, you need a reference frame that everything can be oriented into. You need elevation or topographic information, shape information of some sort, basic image map of some sort, an albedo map that sometimes might be called, but some way of having images projected onto the topography if possible, or whatever shape model you have. So what is the difference between the spatial data infrastructure and the planetary spatial data infrastructure? These need to exist because use them across applications, across all different data sets, many different purposes. You need to allow for this integration of different data sets of the body. The usability is amplified when you combine all this data with framework data. I mean, this is the classic example for data sets. If you have albedo information, you still may want to compare that to mineralogical information, color information. You may want to compare it to neutron information. You want to compare it to a map or whatever. Or a large part of maybe what we do in planetary science is comparative analysis of data, and it's not possible without doing this kind of registration. We've always known that. It's been done since the 1960s. Now with a better name for it, the terrestrial at least adopt a name for it, and ways of building the superstructure around it so it's more efficient, better, more accurate, and more responsive to users. So if you want a quick definition of a foundational data product for planetary science, here it is that it's a planetary reference frame, an elevation model, an orthomosaic that can be used to register and allow integration with other products, basically other foundational, other types of products. So we'll go into these three different types of foundational data sets that we've identified so far. The first one being literally the foundation, the reference frame that's used to establish all your data into. So it's needed for all types of measurements. The measurements have to be tied to something. Measurements from say one image to another, or something like that. But in the end, you tend to need some sort of either local coordinate system or more specifically here a global coordinate system to support your work. And this is whether you're making measurements on the maps, whether you're doing navigation or exploration, whether you're information, whether you're just doing maps. But there are certainly differences that we recognize, especially those of us doing it, between terrestrial and extraterrestrial mapping. And that is, for example, that most of the time you have one data set. For example, a flyby of a small body or something, you have one image data set and that's it. So when you develop the reference frame or even the elevation and other information, you may have to do it concurrently, all at the same time. Whereas for terrestrial use, most mapping organizations develop the coordinate system first, products on it separately or even by a separate agency, as in the United States. But so you also have features that are on the ground, basically human, such as benchmarks like this one from the top of Mount Humphrey. But on planetary bodies, you only have information from your images from a flyby or from orbit generally, and then you have to settle for deciding your own benchmarks, which are mountains or craters or other morphological features, like these 1,000 or so points that we used, that we found on EO to make the control network, and eventually the geologic map of EO. As for planetary, that doesn't really happen as much for terrestrial use. But in the end, again, it supports the data fusion, the comparative analysis that I talked about, being able to register multiple data sets and use them all together. You need the elevation data, some sort of topographic data, and this can exist in many formats, but basically it's the same idea. You can have a gridded elevation product, you can have a triangular network, or at least you have a relationship known between all the points, or you can just have a point cloud that represents the surface of a body. And this works in successive for large planets and spherical bodies. A gridded data set has always been pretty useful and in general use. Whereas for irregular small bodies, comets and asteroids, you may need to fall back to other formats. But in any case, register to the reference frame that you either already have, or again, that you're building concurrently when you process your data set. And these are just examples here of the global topography that was talked about earlier in the week for Mercury, and an example of a representation for Comet Cherenkov-Gerasimenko of the wireframe shape model for that small body. Data is, of course, mosaics, the image mosaics, which preferably are orthomosaics. And for most people, for most of you, this is what you need. This is what you can base everything onto. This is what the other data sets can be tied to. Again, this has to be tied to the geodetic coordinate system, or it's developed at the same time, particularly if you only have images. So you do a photogrammetric solution, or you do a radargrammetric solution, and you solve for the reference frame, you solve for the image mosaic, and maybe you even solve for elevation all at the same time. This just has to work to have these products made and be available for research. And again, these are either regular mosaics or orthomosaics, preferably where the data has been registered and projected onto the topographic data underneath it, so that you're looking at it undistorted on a constant scale or known scale changes as on that. So the examples here is mosaics on the moon, showing that you need to register those data sets and control them. Location on the moon of such data onto local topography. As the question here at the bottom says, why should you care? And it's like, we're just trying to use the unidentified images and try to get science out of them, or even decide what's going on when they've been perhaps wildly distorted without being projected. And this is certainly true of any other type of images too, not just radar in these examples. Go on here that I've been talking about specifics or generalities of how SDI is created, or PSDI. But what are the examples? What does all this mean, or how would you apply it? So I'll talk about the case study, and this really needs to be thought out and worked out in much more detail than this. For every body in the solar system, what data sets do you have? What should be the foundational products? What do you build on? What do you relate all your other data sets to? So for the moon, we have a coordinate system that's basically defined by a JPL ephemeris, by a rotation model. Rather than my talk on Monday morning, that's recommended by IU recommendations. And that's tied to 5 points on the moon, the lunar laser ranging retroreflectors. Those points are known within about 5 centimeters of each other on the surface of the moon, and the orbit can be measured of the moon relative to those retroreflectors at the few centimeter level as well. But that's the base. That's the most accurate points on the moon. But of course, it doesn't do too much good if you want to measure where you are and none of those retroreflectors are anywhere in sight. So the backup, and of course the practical way to measure coordinates on the moon, is to have a reference frame from some larger data set. And in practice, that's done with the low laser altimetry, which probably has an accuracy of about 10 to 15 meters, 100 million points, whatever it is, even up to maybe a trillion points now. The expansion from the original 5 points that you start with. But that's basically a dense enough frame globally to tie everything to, And then in local areas, you're going to do products that may need a higher accuracy or better relative reference range through like photogrammetric solutions. And then you still have to remember to go back and tie your older data sets to your newer reference frames as they improve. And as I'll mention, that yet has to be done. But again, you shouldn't need to worry about all this. It should be transparent. The data set should just be there with known accuracies so you can use them. For elevation data on the moon, there's obviously several data sets. There's the LOLA, there's the WAC stereo, even the Kaguya TC stereo with about 30-meter density at points over the surface of the moon. These images here are 2 examples from LOLA and the LROC WAC. They're registered essentially to the LOLA frame, but there's other data sets that may be important regionally or locally that has not yet been registered. Some of it has been, like the volumetric. Others are working on getting panoramic camera data registered to this. The Chandrian stereo has not been registered to this. So there's different levels of support, and the other some of the other data, for example, the LOLA team has registered approximately a lot of the Kaguya data, the Kaguya DEM tiles to the system. So many other, but many issues exist here then that we need to look at which data sets have which strengths and which data sets have weaknesses, make that information available to the community and make recommendations, have the community make recommendations of how these different data sets can be used. As one example, many people use the WAC topography in the equatorial regions of the moon, but in the polar regions because of shadows, so you have to use LOLA. So a hybrid system may actually be used for a true foundational topographic model for the moon. Again, there's still these issues of how you get older data sets tied into the system. And then finally, for the moon, for the mosaics, there's obviously the LROC WAC mosaics, the Apollo PAN, and other types of mosaics that are done regionally or locally or even globally in some cases. Some of these are tied to LOLA, some of them are not, such as even Lunar Orbiter. And you can say, why use Lunar Orbiter? But there's high enough resolution in Lunar Orbiter images to do change detection and look at changes over 50 years in time since the Lunar Orbiter measurements. And the same thing with the Clementine data. And Emerson Sprayer talked about the Clementine data through LOLA frame, so that's happening for some of the Clementine data. But for example, it's not happening for the near IR and high resolution Clementine data, so that work still needs done. So there's a triad here that I'm describing: reference frames, the topography, and the images that do exist for the moon and are fairly good shape, but there still needs to be work done on identifying their characteristics and how best to use them. And then there's a whole other talk here that could be done about the uncertainty of these products. It's evaluated and how that information would be used by you, the user. But that's actually an area that in the end, you may have that information, and when you're comparing data sets, you have to keep track of the uncertainty of the data sets. So you know you're comparing the same spot on one to the same spot on another. By pointing out again that this is a general framework, this isn't a simple solution to just use spatial data infrastructure. The concepts should be very useful, at least many of us, if you've heard these talks, think they're going to be very useful for planetary science, that allow you to fuse the data, to allow you to do comparisons between the data, and to support all users in planetary science who use any spatial data, which is effectively, we have described these types of foundational products. We would ask if there's anything we're missing. We're not sure that there is, but certainly on particular bodies, it may not just be the imaging data set that's important to register to, as an example. But the other bigger issue that I've mentioned a few times here is that this work needs to be done in terms of evaluating what are the foundational data sets, and who's going to do that, what type of information really needs to be collected, and bring the older data sets that people still want to use into the same reference frame so that you can compare data. So my understanding is that MapSit is here to help work on this as one of its main topics, but it needs your input. So let the people on the MapSit know, or just contact myself or Jay or others who are involved with this work.
Okay, unfortunately, we don't have a whole lot of time for questions, but I know Brandon will be around, so feel free to grab him and talk to him about the things he talked about. So now for the talk we've all been waiting for, no pressure, Lisa. It's come up multiple times, distinguishing between PDS and PSDI and how they work together. Just so you know, if you're following along in your program and you're expecting Jay Lohr to get up there and talk, he's going to be leading our panel discussion a little bit later, so we gave him a break with not making him give a talk as well. So if you have questions about the talk he was going to give, also feel free to grab him. So feel free to take it away, Mr. Brett.
Hello? Hear me? Play on. Can you hear me? No? Okay, better, all right, thank you. So yeah, I wish I could say this was the pièce de résistance of this event, but really the panel discussion that follows, and therefore, in the interest of time, and because Jay graciously presentation, I'm going to go through this relatively quickly so that we can have more time for discussion afterwards. So I'm going to talk about what PDS is, and particularly with reference to the charter and the requirements of PDS. I'll discuss briefly PDS-4 because you've heard a lot about that this week. And then the discipline node organization, which kind of defines each node's approach to how we serve our community. And the particular examples I'll show are from the cartography and imaging sciences or imaging node, because that is my perspective within PDS. But there are many other examples in PDS of the same kinds of products. And then finally, I'll wrap up by summarizing where PDS fits into the PDSDI concept. So the PDS is a federation of distributed discipline nodes and support nodes. So the PDS charter focuses on the efficient collection and archiving and accessibility of the products, submissions and research programs and data analysis programs to the PDS. Our requirements are to provide expertise to these missions and data providers, archive and document their data. We collect and maintain the archives, data accessible through a variety of data delivery services that tend to be tailored toward our disciplines. And in some, we focus on the long-term preservation and usability of the fundamental data products that derive from these data providers. PDS-4 is the current incarnation of PDS. You've heard a lot about this week. It's the new PDS. It's intended to be an integrated system with a systems approach, preservation model, and the whole emphasis behind PDS-4 is to modernize the archive and to develop relationships among the metadata that allow much more efficient searching for and identifying products that are the desirable result of PDS searches. This is all dependent on the use of these kinds of internal references. Of course, we intend to help data providers do exactly that. So this is just a depiction, a fairly simplified depiction of what PDS is, and particularly the data nodes, the discipline nodes, and the technical support nodes. What's missing from here are the numerous data nodes, and for example, there's an LROC data node, and so on. Many other nodes that make this diagram fairly prickly, I guess you could say. So the science discipline focus in PDS ensures that experts that are involved in the PDS are available to help identify, use, and visualize the data that they serve. Each discipline node supports the delivery of their discipline data. And of course, there are some fuzziness here. Widespread use of the geographic searches is relatively recent within the incarnation of PDS, and there are numerous products and services that support those kinds of searches, and I've listed a few there. Some of the discipline lines are a little blurry. Basically, the PDS nodes support each other in relatively major ways. I'll just say for the record that imaging node does not archive all images in PDS. And then, for example, both geosciences and imaging archive DTMs. So there are some searches within PDS that are somewhat more complicated than might appear. Data are found in the nodes that are listed here, and Mars data are distributed across all of the nodes within PDS.
What this means in practice is that we have a unified search that one can access through the PDS engineering node, which is accessible through the PDS homepage. But that search often pushes you right back to the discipline nodes for finding data. And of course, I and many others in PDS accept requests from users to find data, to use data, to identify the best services for their needs and so on. Just to give you some examples that are particularly relevant to the imaging node, the cartography and imaging sciences node, creator of some of the larger image data sets from NASA missions. And so our current holdings are around 900 terabytes and 100 terabytes a year. And this is due largely, not entirely, but largely to the LROC data acquisitions that are currently being acquired through missions. So imaging node, like many other nodes, supports archiving standards with our emphasis on. We've added shape files recently, and we're trying to support users in archiving those kinds of files, and so on. And then we support the validation and delivery of these larger digital image collections and their ancillary and supporting information. The imaging node also leverages the USGS ISIS software to serve processed and derived data products on demand. And an important point to make here is when ISIS is used for a mission pipeline, we help preserve that pipeline in perpetuity for raw to calibrated to photometrically corrected to map rejected files. So the whole pipeline is preserved through ISIS, in part because of the association with and particularly the use of ISIS-3. So there's a relatively interdisciplinary focus and expertise within the imaging node. And I've listed some of our major elements here. These are shared across many of the other nodes as well. I would say almost every node that I've worked with is relatively interdisciplinary. Imaging node supports data, particularly for the bodies that are listed here, many of the terrestrial planetary surfaces, and then many of the icy and outer solar system satellites, including dwarf planets and asteroids, again, those listed here. All of the image data that are available in PDS, there are lots of small bodies, FITS images, and so on that are only accessible through the small bodies node, are evolving to support some of the other bodies that have cartographic data sets, and we are supporting them with our cartographic. So these are our primary duties. Again, many of the other nodes have very similar duties. A major focus is on mission interface, and here our primary customer are the NASA missions, and also to some extent the NASA managers. Delivery and of data that have cartographic elements. Many of imaging and many of the other nodes spend a great deal of time supporting data users and providing sophisticated searches for the discipline primarily. And then this meeting is a prime example of the kind of training that PDS engages in. This is the third such meeting. We've had lots of other smaller satellite-focused meetings over the years. This kind of meeting and others will continue to grow and to support the user community by gathering a lot of presenters such as yourselves in the latest methods and data sets and techniques for accessing and using data. Just
Nope.
Okay, we're back. So this is just a quick list of some of the services that are provided by imaging, and the point here is that we provide many types of services for many of our data users. The photojournal is sort of the pre-picture location. There's a general data portal accessible from the imaging node website. And then the planetary image atlas has faceted searches and very sophisticated searches for data based on a wide variety of imaging geometry parameters. And it also more recently supports the landmark feature classification and searches that you might group in the general term of informatics. So Map-A-Planet has been around for quite a long time, maybe 15, 20 years almost. This was one of the earliest geographic-based search entities within the PDS. It has evolved now to Map-A-Planet 2, and if you're a fond user of the older Map-A-Planet, it will soon be going away. Maybe 3 years now, but it's true now. The government is about to shut it down. So this also supports base maps for searches at other nodes or the products that are delivered through Map2, and then supported by standardized web mapping surfaces for virtually all of the map bodies in the solar system. And then it has quite a fair amount of, through using the ISIS processing base, it enables fairly sophisticated development of derived products on demand by users. And quite a few people use that every month to acquire data sets and segments of some of these larger image files. And then the imaging node Annex is a relatively newer product. And the idea here is that Map2 was evolved to deliver products that were internal to the USGS to some extent, and from missions that were supported by those entities. And the Annex was a way of allowing us to accept data from non-USGS and non-NASA, non-cartography program products. And so the focus there is on geospatial products, mosaics, maps. They need not be global products that result from data analysis programs. So this is our way of helping you deliver products that, for example, were funded by PDART and so on. And as I mentioned, we're working hard now. A presentation made by Moses Malasso the other day, yesterday, I guess, about shapefiles and their support through PDS. So through this website, we retain the link to the heritage and links to publications and information on accuracy and so on. So the Planetary Image Locator tool, or PILOT, it uses the Unified Planetary Coordinates Database, which is an attempt to make sure that the user need not understand or care about what the original coordinate system was for data. For example, for Mars Global Surveyor data, the instruments used a variety of coordinate systems for the same target. And so we're trying to prevent you from having to worry about that. Uses that database, and other nodes do as well, to support primarily data for which there is an ISIS-3 camera model. And this allows us to refine the geometry for data searches. And most of the great majority of data within the imaging node are supported through PILOT searches. And for example, the Cassini team, members of the Cassini team have recently been using the PILOT, enables them to do relatively sophisticated searches that they were accustomed to using with their own tools, but which will soon be going away. So PILOT is sort of the input point to the use of the protection on the web services, which is listed there near the bottom. And this ties directly to ISIS-3 software. So if you need a regional mosaic, something like that, that is processed and delivered at a higher, you need not download and learn how to use ISIS. You can use it directly through some of these. So hopefully these examples illustrate for you that PDS, and the examples I provided are from the imaging node, but there are other services. You've heard about the Orbital Data Explorer, for example, this week from the Geosciences node, and there have been numerous others. Many of the PDS nodes provide very sophisticated, discipline-focused user search tools for finding and locating the right data for your science. And our focus in PDS is on long-term preservation of the data. And our customers are NASA missions, NASA managers, current and future science users. And I guess I would argue that the PSDI initiative that you've heard so much about this morning and earlier this week, it has a broader focus that extends well beyond the elements of data and data archiving to include broader aspects of the community, and including things like planning for products that will be needed in the future. It emphasizes the use of latest technologies and the latest data formats that the community considers useful, which may not be the same as archiving formats. And it's designed to enable rapid development of a more tailored visualization service. So in particular, there are numerous examples of PSDIs within PDS and within the planetary sciences community. And these are all served under the umbrella of the PSDI. And then finally, the PSDI, you've seen the data, information, knowledge, and wisdom chart. The PSDI is meant to support a broader aspect of our research community and numerous other interests, well beyond just the data. So this is just the older illustration of the bubble chart that you've seen several times this week. Nice our overarching PSDI on these things, but PDS is an element of the PSDI initiative. It's a partner, I would say, and PDS is involved in the MAPSIC group. One in PDS or who is particularly interested in what PDS does or does not do is interested in having input to MAPSIC, please let me know. There would be an opportunity for you to be involved in MAPSIC if you have strong interests there. So PDS complements and facilitates the development of the PSDI going forward. And again, this is the vision and the implementation plan that you all are intended to help us develop. So. So you will have a chance to ask questions during the panel discussion.
Yep, so you're right at 15 minutes, but we got a moment or two before Jamie comes back up. If you have any other questions for Lisa.
Can you say something about the output of the roadmap, the PDS roadmap?
That's actually the next talk. Oh, the PDS roadmap, I'm sorry, not the MAPSIC roadmap. So the PDS roadmap has been under development for more than a year. It's about 140 pages or something now, and it's about to be released. We're about to finish it, I would say, within the next week or two, I think is the current schedule. And there is a section in there that describes, well, there are many community-based findings. So there's an element within the roadmap for PDS that talks about what PDS does and what it does not do, partly because there are many aspects of the broader community interest that PDS has been expected to address, but does not. For example, PDS does not make many of the derived products that are needed for the foundational products, and so on. So we're those kinds of relationships.
Okay, with our intent to start the discussion panel right near the top of the hour, we have Jamie. I don't know if you feel like that's enough time or not.
5 minutes?
Yeah, we can have a few minutes bleed over.
You mean you want me to take 5 minutes?
Plus or minus a couple.
So the computer's mouse is not responding. So yeah, our laptop is frozen, so we're trying to move to the last talk. Justin, your mouse is on the screen.
There. Oh, there it is. Yeah, that's
we've been talking about a little bit is developing a roadmap. So we're in the home stretch right now. I'll talk a few minutes about the roadmap. We'll have a panel discussion about PSDI, and that will be it for the day. So thank you once again for all your feedback and comments and sticking with this. So what we would like to do get from a roadmap is, and Sarah's been talking with me about this fairly frequently, like, please give us a roadmap. So what this does is it's a document. It enables NASA to execute prioritization decisions and to be able to move forward on various things. And so we're fashioning this roadmap after various other roadmaps that exist out there for different communities. And we're starting with a statement of task that essentially includes these 4 main bullet points for now. And again, these things are evolving. We're talking about them as we go forward. And I think after this week, there will be some tweaking of these things as well. But essentially, we need a plan for obtaining and using planetary spatial data, their expertise, to fully exploit the data that we have and the expertise that we have in the community. Help a broad user community of scientists who are not experts in spatial data concepts, as you heard before from Justin. And then also we want to plan for and enable performance and technology as those things improve and become available, and finally support NASA in its exploration goals. And so we have 3 kind of main overarching themes right now. And the first is ensure planetary data are accessible and usable. It is to strategize for needed expertise and tools and capability. And the third is to enable future NASA science and exploration goals. And maybe those second 2 are where we start to have this kind of broader umbrella than a more focused kind of data accessibility that PBS is able to do. And so we'll go into just a little bit of detail on each of these. First, we want to ensure that planetary data are accessible and usable. And so we just add this 0 point. There are points 1 and 2. It was easier for me to make this 0 for right now. So we want to make sure the data is, first of all, properly acquired. And so this might include things like make sure there's proper planning for data acquisition, make sure that there's calibration done prior to launch and in flight, and ensure genetic control and those various things that Brent talked about earlier. And then point 1 is, and right now these are in the form of questions. I think it helps us to figure out where we're going with these things. Eventually we will assert how we feel on each of these positions. So how can we ensure that new and existing planetary spatial data are available, usable, searchable, or discoverable? Okay. Maybe we need to consider how to have portals for analysis-ready products. And then there's this question, is this the job of the PDS? If so, do they have the sufficient resources to be able to do this? They need more resources. What is the funding like for PDS, and what are the various sort of emphases that they're having for this? So to have this portal so that we have this data that just work. We are also concerned with the fact that some data set knowledge is not available beyond mission life. And so as we think about, well, how do we access this Voyager image and what it's like? And so maybe strategizing how to either maintain that knowledge or get it to a point where sit there and has been used to create the product that exists now that can be used from now on by the community. Really good community tools like JMARS and other things like that of course are really valuable and should be encouraged and should be used. Some of these things are not necessarily permanent, so how do we deal with that aspect of things as well? And so a lot of what a roadmap should also do is thinking ahead into the future. How do we deal with future concerns? There is a terrestrial-based repository and also access location called Polar Hub. And this is kind of nice. It's the National Science Foundation funded science data for polar science. And so we can look at places like this and see if this is some kind of model we can follow. To consider what about the RPIFs? Is this a role that RPIFs could also play? Is thinking about these sort of higher level products and access to that for people. And then point number 2 under this bullet, or under this theme, how can we be sure that all products from a given body or location can be found as well? And Lisa mentioned a little bit of the challenges of this PDS is facing. Okay, so then we have our second overarching theme, which is to strategize for needed expertise and tools and capabilities. And so how can we ensure that tools are properly developed and available to obtain, process, and use data to their fullest extent? We want to think about technologies and techniques and capabilities that need to be encouraged. Again, look to other data user groups for solutions, terrestrial data, for example. Expertise and institutional knowledge. And we want to think about the current needs, encourage training in those needs, encourage research into new ideas about data management and processing and that way. And then number 3 under this is how do we help forward emerging data technologies? I think we've been chatted with Jay and said at some point you'll just be able to like hit your hand and you'll see the image in your eye pop up. You know, I mean, of course we're not quite there, but things are moving so quickly that we want to think about how do we help promote these things that really help us. The inherent transience of tools and services. If it's not a tool, then that can have problems because technology changes so fast that some things become obsolete. How do we deal with that? Do we recommend they're open source so that they can change? We focus on this interoperability in terms of formats, and so that line of thinking, interoperability might help us sort of feature a little bit better. And then we can get into some more specifics, and here's one area. What help can be given to small bodies? Tools and standards. And the reason we pick on that is just that they're not standard shapes, and this is really tricky. I was just talking with Sebastian in the back about how this, you know, one of their main focuses at ESA is dealing with Rosetta, and of course that is a really non-standard body, so that's challenging in many ways. The last overarching theme is to enable future NASA science and exploration goals. And so how can we help enable NASA science and exploration, especially pertaining to mission success, for input on foundational data products for future exploration? How can we stay communicating clearly with headquarters about what they need and what we can provide? And we're thinking about these things that Brent was talking about, reference frames and ortho images and mosaics, topography and shape models. And then what are or should be the standards for data infrastructure for missions? And of course we have to be careful with standards because if there's a standard, then you have to follow it. Right? So you be careful what standards you establish, but at the same time, if there's a standard, then there may be more interoperability, different platforms and analysis tools, and that benefits people. So weighing this idea of, do we force Europa to use west longitude, or do we let them use their east longitude, or whatever it is, you know what I mean? And having different things like that so that everyone can use what is produced. And just a couple more on this one. How should PSDI activities be prioritized to best take advantage of the limited funding resources? Of course, ultimately, that has to be done. And then how can PSDI relate to other planetary communities? So we think about planetary astronomy, and maybe we look at how they're also dealing with their data. And then also samples. And we have, of course, a lot of value to us in planetary. And Laszlo talked a little bit about human exploration as well, and I think there's a really strong avenue for us to be able to help with human exploration. And they are. Okay, so those are our main themes. So I should restate them again. Just go backwards really quickly. Planetary data are accessible and usable. Strategizing for expertise and tools and capability, and then helping enable basic science and exploration goals of NASA. I think a lot of things that NASA can do will fall under those 3 things, but we could decide there need to be more overarching themes, we need to separate them out, or whatever it is we need to do. Best express what it is we would like to see done as a community. And so I guess, haven't told the steering committee yet, hope to do is to draft, get a draft circulating to everyone by the end of the summer. I'd love to deliver this to NASA by the end of this year. And I recognize we're still describing to everybody what PSDI is, and that's a challenge. Maps are dynamic and they evolve continually, and so I think it's also good to get something out. And I think having a roadmap, I was just thinking this is really valuable to compare yes roadmap with PSDI or with massive PSDI roadmap, and that helps to sort of say, okay, here's where we are different. Here's where we overlap. Here are the things that help establish what our different goals are, and that is really should be inherent to a roadmap. Are there questions or comments from the fleet? Yes.
Hi, Jamie. For those who don't know me, I'm Peter Smart from the University of Hawaii. I was pleased to see that both you and Lisa in her previous talk mentioned the archives. Steve Williams, Justin Hackley, and I are all directors of regional planetary image facilities. The input from the rest of the community. We're struggling in terms of how do we go from being a library-based storage room to the open holiday, for example, to better serving the community, and in particular, community colleges and find it really hard to access PDS data. Input from the rest of the community on how best the archives might actually fit into this new PSDI roadmap, because whether it's a space science student or whether it's a community college professor who's trying to put together an educational proposal, they find it really hard to work with PDS. And so the archives right now seem to be filling a role where you're saying, reaching out to, but we're a small community compared to the rest of the effort. And so just in general, people, I'd be really interested if Justin or Dave Williams, please let us know how we can actually help facilitate some of this outreach to the community.
Thank you.
Jenny, it's Ray Arvidsson again. What is the review process? Is there a review process before delivery to NASA? What's the schedule?
We will review as a massive community, so in the sense that from everyone on this roadmap get comments and get so that we can iterate on those drafts and get those back to people again. Here's a new draft from your. It would operate a lot like the roadmap for Ocean Worlds. That's ongoing right now, and this is, stood up underneath OPAG and is just put up to the community to have comment on, but eventually that group tasked with making that delivers it to NASA.
So there's an open circulation at the end of the summer?
Yes, that's right.
Okay, what we'd like to do now is it's gonna be a little bit ad hoc here, but we'd like to have a discussion panel that Jay Laura is gonna lead for us, and so what we're going to do is we're going to have about 5 of us, I think. We'll probably take some chairs and put them up maybe in the center of the room and just pass the remote mic around. While we're getting that set up, just a couple of moments, maybe we'll have Jay give a quick overview of what he's intending. A quick bathroom break should be only a minute or two here, but we'll get rolling here real quick. So thanks.
You're up here. Yeah, you are. Come on up. Make sure we can.
People and data, and if technology is driving us forward dynamically, and if policy jobs be more static force that keeps things in check and make sure it's accomplishing it. And it's that ratcheting progress between static and dynamic element that really makes this whole thing go. Yeah, and technologists, programs, technologists, all they want to do is more tools, so they can get more without thinking as much about the usability stuff. And they admit that. And then people, policy are saying, whoa, whoa. You need to that you check to make sure that it's still pushing the mission. And not just moving at a breakneck pace into their own but they use user feedback.
All right, why don't we get this thing started? So, I think we've got a couple more people that are coming up. So the first thing I wanted to do was do the whole engage the audience thing, which I know I personally hate. Justin can attest to my hate of icebreakers in general. But I'm making people do it so we all stop checking our email. Completely guilty. But so my first question for the audience is, how many people in the room would be comfortable going back to their home institution and talking about what PSDI is? So like, how many people could return home and say, I know what PSDI is, I know what the pieces are, and I want to talk to you about it? All right, awesome, but also kind of concerning. So the goal of the panel discussion is that all the people that didn't raise their hand will be able to go back and do that. This goes back to Justin's talk, where he talked about building community awareness. And so the goal here is to have a whole bunch more spokespeople here. Next question for the room, and then I will stop and we'll grill everybody up here. How many people in the room can cite their work within the context of that 5-piece view? And when I say the 5-piece view, I'm talking about people, data access, policies, and standards. So how many people can say, hey, you know, I work on this, and my work touches these pieces. So this is where I can integrate into this view. All right, sweet, more people, awesome. So here's the goal. I'm going to ask these guys some questions. Hopefully they're going to disagree with each other, so that we can get some conversation going. If they're not disagreeing with each other, or you have questions, please hop up, and we kind of want to do questions on the fly. So the goal here is to have a conversation. We've all had to sit here for a couple days and watch presentations, which have been awesome, but it'd be great to talk. So my first one, I guess Justin's going first because he's got the mic. Give us your 30-second elevator pitch for PSDI. What is it? You got 30 seconds.
I gave mine on Monday. I just gave mine.
That's 15 years, right? So very quickly, the presentation I gave earlier today, it's a theoretical framework over which it provides a mechanism for all the various components that Jay just talked about of data, accessibility, standards and policies and people, through which all of us can communicate with one another, get on the same page, make sure that we are providing the best services to the community's involved in what the standards and policies are, and so that we are working all effectively together to provide the best possible product, not only for ourselves in science, but for the people paying through taxpayer dollars.
Is it theoretical or virtual? And there's a little bit of a difference to me.
That's a fair point. I call it theoretical, but why would you say different? Sorry, just so that everyone hears. Yeah, so the question was, is it a theoretical framework or hypothetical? No, virtual, sorry, virtual. So I would say theoretical. Idea of why you would say it's different, that would be good to know.
I guess theoretical suggests to me that it's not yet in place, and virtual suggests it's in place, but it's not a physical structure.
Thanks, Mike.
I think I thought of it as in a different way, although I still agreed with theoretical. And theoretical in the sense that it doesn't really exist. Well, I think I do mean it doesn't really exist. Maybe it's just that it's not a sort of rigid set established, but instead is an idea of how to process, use, disseminate, store data. And so in that sense, I think of it more as theoretical. Like, how do we conceptualize this? How do we wrap our minds around this large problem that deals with all aspects of data? Instead of placing rigid framework in place, it can be very loose. Maybe that's my 30-second pitch as well. It's just how can we help people use all of this data, obtain it? How can we best
make use of the big resource that we have.
It just seems like so many elements of it exist. It seems like the PSDI exists in some form, in virtual form. So I guess that's why I'm wondering why it's sort of theoretical as you described it, Jamie.
Yeah, I guess I just want to clarify. You're 100% right. Kind of as I alluded to in my presentation, a lot of people are already doing this because they've had to do it, right? It's just, it's not fully communicated and coordinated. One of the great points that was brought up later by Ray was basically, yes, this is the official communications mechanism effectively where we can all, with respect to all the great work that's already happening. So yeah, the concept itself is theoretical and that we're still talking about it and we're trying to implement it formally. But yes, in terms of actual closer to that than the suggest.
Thank you.
Is this my turn for the 30-second? Yes. So I've been a proponent of interoperability for the last 20 years, and so I see PSDI as kind of trying to facilitate the usability of data. If we look at this from a standpoint of PDS does not have the funding to provide data necessarily always in a usable format. For example, GDAL was not funded by the PDS. The kind of the acceptance of shape files for vector formats is not PDS standard, it will never be. But yet all the nodes have shape files. WMS mosaics, half terabyte WMS live serve mosaics, saying it was a more community driven from the bottom up. So the idea of meeting OGC standards was not a PDS thing, it was community grassroots effort. And so I think we have to find, I am PDS, you know, I am Spartacus. I am PDS, I am part of PDS. We're not initiated by the PDS. And so how does the PSDI make sure that we evolve with technology, but still be able to have PDS as a critical component?
Well, and I think it was Justin who said this. I think there's a huge element of for avoiding redundancy, for being as efficient as possible, for communicating when someone has funding to do something that's very similar to what someone else wants to do, making sure if that happens that the two are different, if possible, that the results and products are different. So there's a whole element making sure that we're ready to process data from a specific instrument that may be new to us. Forward-looking planning element that PDS does not do for the community that currently MAPSIT can and should be doing for us. It extends beyond what the PDS does. So I think that, as I said earlier, I think PDS is very much a partner in all of this, but there's a missing element there that PDS does not provide and in the future. In terms of prioritization of what we should do next, PDS is responsive to active missions and cases weigh in on the future efforts of NASA exploration. When such a request or mandate comes down, the PDS will step up to help, as will many other people in the community, and there needs to be a sort of community-driven effort to realize what would be needed to be responsive to that kind of effort.
It looks like Mike's ready for a question, so if you have a question or a comment and you're like, I don't agree, that'd be awesome. Just throw your hand up and Mike will come over.
It's me again. So what happens after the roadmap? I'm beginning to worry about them. I think I understand what you guys are doing, but that is still a little bit of fuzziness there. Put together. But let's assume we have a good roadmap. It provides the framework, provides the communication. Roadmap's delivered. Everybody likes it. It's now January. How do we keep it going?
Yeah, I think that we need to keep meeting as a community, and so we can model this after other ags and have here like this, where we have a community meeting and get together and talk about, okay, here's the roadmap is finished now. Now here's what we're doing this year. Here are the things that we're concerned about, and And at that point, I think we'll be able to be drilling down into more specific questions and problems. You know, what kinds of want to prioritize as a community right now, or whatever else it is we decide to do. And so absolutely, I think we should continue to meet as a group. We can do that also at conferences, we can, wherever it is. And that keeps us as a community-based group and ensures that things are moving forward. We revise the roadmap and, you know, add to it, put different things in. So just like other acts, we just have to keep moving forward.
And if you look, I'm going to jump in and pretend like I'm in there. If you look at the terrestrial example, you'll see lots of really specific SDIs. So Polar Hub is a great example, right? They only focus on polar data. And it's a model where you could say that there potentially could be body-specific SDIs. And so what would you do then? You know, you would go out and basically say, okay, what are the existing knowledge infrastructures? So I'm talking to that long arrow there. What are our existing knowledge infrastructures? Where are the gaps in those knowledge infrastructures? What would be required to facilitate getting the existing data out of the PDS, potentially reformatting it to make it more GIS compliant if that's necessary. If that's not necessary, awesome, go directly to the PDS. And then start to get it in a product view, if you will. So what are the data access mechanisms so specific PSDI can support the community? What are the policies that we would need NASA to set, or what are the policies we need to use, and then be able to open it up for the broader community and say, hey, we have an infrastructure here. We would love to start having tools developed against this infrastructure, analytic platforms against this infrastructure. So as a community, here's the infrastructure, start to develop against it.
This doesn't happen without funding, right? So Sarah's already implied that what MAPSIT and the community derives at as far as priorities for potential standards that ride on top of BDS or created, those will hopefully influence PDARs. Those will hopefully influence NASA funds to actually make this happen. And so, you know, the next step is to get the roadmap, but then to influence the funding avenue.
It also influences what NASA does.
Sure, yeah, but this is bigger. This is bigger than Astro. This is community.
The other thing to note is it also influences policy. So in order for anyone to really buy into any of this, NASA has to say, yes, we agree with what you said in that roadmap. Here's how it needs to be implemented. Here's how we are going to put it into data calls or announcements of opportunity for missions or research. There's that standards and policies component that has to follow on that will make it actually official.
Which is why we, during this process, keep Sarah really intimately involved with everything and have her continually giving her input as well, as I've seen.
I think one more question, and then I'll hit up the next one for everyone up here.
Devin from University of Tennessee. This share funding kind of brings up a question that I had, and sort of I think an uninteresting question maybe for most people, but how to say it other than just where does the money come from for things like, I mean, Laszlo gave us this great chart about USGS. Lisa, who's at the USGS, talked to us about the PDS imaging node. So how does that funding work? Broader scale question. For this PSID that we want, are we asking NASA to rearrange funding or to provide more funding, or what is it that we're asking for in terms of, you know, what Congress will care about?
So I think there's been a lot of good PDARs. In some sense, they've been rampant. And so if they're targeted towards the goal, that funding would be the same, but it would be towards a common goal instead of kind of a random shot, which it kind of feels like.
In many ways, that's not my problem, or any of our problem. A set of findings that says, look, in order for you to get the most out of your $1 billion mission, you need to, you know, we see that these kinds of priorities exist for imaging and for data and for, you know, giving access to that data to everybody. And these are the needs we have. And then we set that up, and that's for them to decide. I don't think we have to say, and I understand it's expensive, but you can take money from here, put it here. First, we can't even do that, and then second, there's money, so rain it on down from on high, that's my perspective, give me money. And the way you do that is to show that you have a great need.
Or that you can more efficiently use funds by doing it in this manner than by the current mechanism, right? So that's possible as well.
So the next question that I had, and for these guys, but feel free to jump in, was basically I'm playing devil's advocate, and Justin had me write a section about this in the paper, but I want to hear from everybody here. Don't we already have a PSDI? And isn't PDS an existing PSDI? It exists. We're good to go. So it's kind of a loaded question, but I want to hear from these guys, and we want to hear from everybody out there. Go for it, Trent.
No comment. No, I think I've already stated that a lot of the things that the community is doing is kind of filling these holes. I think we would do better as a community if we kind of agreed on making sure that we're on the same road. We've seen so many good interfaces. They're utilizing some of the same back end, some not, some are homegrown. If we just had a little bit more coordination, we wouldn't have as much duplication. We get to the point where dynamic map, and if we can get to the point where I just expect that to happen, then that can get folded back into the PDS. I expect that when I hit this NASA JPL website, I get a dynamic map back. Then that's the point where you cross that bridge and you go, okay, thing that I need as a scientist, and it just becomes part of the community. It's not something we have to always reinvent and download and convert to FITS and TIFF and all these other things.
What he said, yeah, I've already said that I believe that PDS is a partner in the PSDI initiative, and I think an important partner that focuses on preserving the data that are required to move forward and to develop some of that is needed to enable the collaboration and the future research. So just to avoid being redundant,
as was discussed at the last workshop, there are not good lines of communication between the people doing the development work, establishing policy, or the end users. And PDS has some of those lines established, locked off inside of PDS. So people not in PDS, PDS is a black box. So what I see I forget the acronym, what I see y'all is doing is making that a community conversation. So that we're not duplicating effort that the PDS is doing. I don't want to do that. As an example, all of the PDART calls so far have called for a PDS read-write tool. And I know the PDS is developing those. And it's never been funded. So there's some breakdown in communication that needs to be corrected so that we don't write proposals for things other people already doing.
I totally agree with you. And in fact, that's one of the main motivations for having this kind of meeting and this kind of conversation that brings together the science perspective and the archiving perspective and the developers' perspective and so on. And I guess I agree with you 1,000%.
I think I think it would be unfair to ask PDS to deal with these problems of sort of disparate, tools that might be popping up, and then also to ask them just to deal with strategizing out to the long term. And that's really where I see this group as sitting in this bubble above everything, kind of looking down, saying, how's it going, and what do we need, and is everybody talking to each other, and what do we want in the future? That's really how I see this doing.
I'd like to throw a comment in that I see PDS as one portion of the infrastructure, right? And mixing up this planetary data or planetary spatial data infrastructure and planetary data system, but the PDS is only one small part of that we as a community have. And I'm hopeful that the PSDI will start to address such as tools and accessibility of, or ability of those tools to multiple data sets and et cetera. Whereas right now with PDS, we are archiving the data, and presenting the data, but not doing anything else with that.
Didn't have the PDS in the concept of a PSDI, we'd have a lot farther to go. Yes. And you're absolutely right. The PDS forms an important foundational cornerstone to moving forward into a PSDI.
I like to think about vision things, like where we'll be in 5 years. And the PDS does a pretty good job of interacting with the products. All the way from here's a new mission, let's establish the context, let's have a data and archive working group. No, you really need to do derived products. I don't have any money to do them anyway. Make sure you get raw and derived products. Well, you got to do this documentation. Why do I have to have this format? Because otherwise people won't be able to use your data. That's an enormous task. And it's a person-to-person thing with many interfaces. And we developed a schedule for that whole set of processes for delivery. We do a validation, peer review. We get the data into the system. We make the data available. We very, very rarely make value-added products. Put them in there, make them accessible to the extent that we can. But a lot of what we do is in the front end, making sure that those products are made, they're going to be in the right format, they're validated like journal papers, that they're available with the tools that we can have. Money for PDS is on the upfront part. To make sure that we have the right formats, the right content, and everything is out there and preserved. We don't do too well in terms of accessibility relative to what we could be doing if we had more money. Although you can get things. We don't make value-added products. Thinking 5 years from now, we'll still be doing that. We'll be doing, I think, on a continuing basis, in addition to the roadmap, saying, whoa, here's what we really need to do in terms of policies and formats, all the way from the first contact with the producers, all the way through the system. And then we need to make these products, however they're done, however they're served in the PDS or otherwise, that really would make the products much more usable than you have already. Mosaics, the right coordinate systems, the right things together, et cetera, et cetera. So we'd be looking to the whatever your acronym is, to actually get those back to us so that we can do a better job all the way from first contact to getting the data made and produced and validated and available for from PDARTs, by Astro, by whomever, making the value-added products that the community really wants that don't necessarily come from the instrument teams.
That's right. I think Ray's got it. I think he knows.
Yeah, Ray, I was gonna suggest the mic drop. Just leave. Walk away. You're done. You got it.
What Ray said, because one of the things that I'm worried about is if this infrastructure team only looks at tools and et cetera, then will be forgotten. And I'm encouraging not to forget that PDS is part of the infrastructure for data. So when I haven't seen your roadmap, so I don't know what's in it, but I hope that you have some discussion, data archival as well as data accessibility and use.
I just want to jump in really quick too and make sure there's a distinction. The SDIs are not about tools. It's not like here's a tool factory, we churn out tools, everyone loves tools. The SDI is the infrastructure that supports the creation of tools. So we're not all sitting up here saying we're going to make lots and lots of tools. It has nothing to do with tools. We're going to go out to the community and say,
it doesn't have nothing to do
with
tools.
It has a lot less to do with tools.
No, it has everything to do with the infrastructure, and tools are part of the infrastructure. And if you're going to do the whole infrastructure, you have to be concerned with tools. You have to be concerned with data archival as well.
Yeah, I would agree with every single person that has said that the PDS is a cornerstone to actually making this happen. If the PDS didn't exist, we would be in a bad spot, basically.
Hey, Jay. Sorry. I think at this point,
a lot of people, everyone's seen like the 5-element chart, and it makes sense as an SDI. I think now that everyone's familiar with it, it would be appropriate to start expanding that to more accurately describe the planetary, and so that people can start to understand how all these elements relate to one another. And as you start to get to the weeds of the mechanisms that make this all work and the role in it, because that's how you start to identify the gaps and the problems that we have and start to address those. So I think that's the area that Justin presented. You know, we're midway there, and I think it's the conversation is kind of, it's time to move past what is an SDI. Again, it's essential to start there, for sure. Let's start putting out some other things, other visual models, whatever it is, that more accurately describe what's going on, so that people have a common understanding of where we're going.
So I was just going to make the point that I think Jay was alluding to the fact that the infrastructure supports the tools that the scientists use. Obviously, you need tools to make those data products infrastructural, so that there's kind of a inflation of products here. But the goal of an SDI is to make the data accessible for tools and to develop tools, but really the accessibility of the data for the scientists.
So I'd like to make 2 comments. One, I just realized from discussion, I really like how PSDI will give us the ability to distinguish between AO and analysis. Sorry, IO and analysis. It's like Jay alluded yesterday to a talk. It would be nice if we actually solved at some point, finally, the biggest hurdles of data IO, more interesting things. And I think it sounds like PSDI will enable us to separate between these issues, which I don't think the current PDS can do so much. But yeah, we'll support us with that. But I actually, and the second point, I wanted to ask the community a daunting question. Who should be responsible for initiating updates of older data structures or data sets? So I was wondering for myself, for example, Cassini data sets that have been agreed with contractual similar-like structures. I'm not sure if I'm allowed to say contract, 20 years ago. And there was maybe no something similar like that to update this. So the format and the way it's distributed or disseminated in PDS is like that 20 years ago. And I wanted to ask the community this daring question. Instrument owner, the instrument lead, be responsible to initiate that upgrade? Or should that not maybe even pop up from the community saying, I want a more modern version of this? Should the instrument lead be forced to write a PDA for that after Cassini ends? Or should we not somehow have a data survey on PDS saying everything older than 10 years actually deserves funded upgrades?
What do you mean by upgrades? Are you talking about like recalibration of data, or are you just talking about format upgrades?
So for example, I can only speak to some formats I know, but the current disseminated UVIS data products lead to a tool that needs old versions of Java to run that creates IDL procedures. So it's a mess.
Sure.
And then I cannot make it run even. So something like that. Who would be initiating this kind of upgrades? Are we forced to write PDAs for that, or should that not be a little bit easier to be allowed and funded to upgrade this?
So there are a lot of different answers to that, I think. So one of them certainly is the Darwinian process of proposals, certainly, right? There are enough people that need that, they'll write a proposal, and the community will judge that it's a worthwhile endeavor to do. The other thing that we can do as a community is we can say, it's less important to have that one. And so one of the things that MAPSIT as a community can do is attempt to prioritize, pass that to NASA, which can then use that when they give instructions to review panels for PDAs. You could also envision some sort of national data clearinghouse that's in charge of doing more than just archiving like the PDS. You have some group of people that are responsible for saying, oh, that doesn't do the same thing anymore, we need to modernize that. But that's a whole kind of infrastructure infrastructure not there. That's a whole organization and a funding system that we don't have or even conceive of at this time. Those could be things that we as a group can think about how maybe that sort of thing should evolve when NASA is actually thinking about planetary spatial data infrastructure.
Question.
So this whole conversation started with why initiate a PSDI if PDS exists. And to me, I think that from this conversation, PDS is an integral part of the PSDI, 5 or 6 component framework that connects data to people. And if we incorporate PDS into that framework visually, explaining how PDS is relevant to this PSDI and what the difference is, because it seems to me that the PSDI is a fluid framework that connects data to people as data develops and user needs change, but PDS is a static component that preserves data so that it can always be used by people. So I think visually integrating PDS into that framework will highlight the difference and make it more relatable to more people.
Right, I think that's a great point. And the thing that we need to be careful about doing is just putting PDS in that data block. So has some access networks, they have some that stuff, right? So we need to figure out how to best visually next.
Right, I wasn't saying that it fits. I think you need to expand the framework. It's not just in between data and people.
Hi, Matt Shinaki, University of Arizona. I really appreciate a lot of these talks regarding delivering data to making it accessible to the users of the community. And I feel like that we have to take responsibility as a community in part to deliver that data. And I can just speak from my own personal experience on the high-rise team and my mechanism. My part in the mechanism is delivering high-rise DTMs to the PDS, and we accept, so this is a plug for accepting socket set generated high-rise DTMs to our facility, and we will put those, we'll validate those and put those on the PDS for you. There is a little work to be done in terms of ISIS scripting to get those in a suitable format that we can then deliver. So that's one thing, but I feel like there is some resistance from some groups that are making those types of, in that they don't have, everyone's busy, they've made that paper, they've used that data, and they're gonna, move on and they don't have time. So my message here, my second message is to encourage the community to put time and funding those NASA proposals and to archive that data and deliver it. And that is something as a panel reviewer that you're checking the box right there. You're saying, I'm going to have a student spend 80 hours on the end of year 3 archiving that data. And that's funding that's useful, and as a reviewer you should see as useful. So again, that's just, it's in part on us.
So Matt, I'm hesitant to bring this up. Number one, I 100% agree. Number two, if I were to say that right now in PDART, that would not be allowed because my generated product would not be a PDS4. High-rise is not PDS4. So we're in this gray area.
Yes.
So we have to take that into consideration.
That's another.
It's another thing, but we have to take it into consideration that while we evolve to PDS4, there are things we can't do with current missions. So just as a warning.
The other thing to maybe think about is that PDS is a wonderful data access mechanism. It need not be the only data access mechanism, right? What is important is that they're sitting on top of the same standards. And so if there is stuff that is not PDS compliant, shapefiles are not PDS compliant right now, right? But they're massively valuable, right? And so then the PDS, we need to figure out how to get that data into a format that is PDS compliant and get it into the PDS so that it is long-lived, but we also need to understand that these standards are inherently transient. And so how then can we get the data out of the PDS into whatever the current hot format is and get it served out to the community? What does that look like? So to be a living cornerstone, and then how can we support some of that improved access and usability by interfacing with the PDS. So what's the best way to engage them as a partner? Because I don't want to archive data, I want to get it out to users, but someone absolutely has to be concerned with that aspect.
Just wanted to say, there's a beautiful image right behind you guys that I wanted to talk a little bit about. Messenger Team has provided an online tool that has every layer that generated as a layer. And that includes DEMs, global monochrome maps, east-west illumination, global color, mass data. At the same time, all this data is available within the PDS as well. And so my question is, or my point is that it sounds to me like the basis for what we're talking about in PSDI. Plus, what is the future or vision of taking that product as an example to improve, or as an example applied to other bodies, other plans, other data sets?
Yeah, that's definitely a good example of the PSDI, and simple in some ways because Messenger's a single thing. It's a single organization, and its PI can tell how to do things, which is great. I think that one of the things that we could find as a community is we could encourage NASA, when they make instrument calls, that a mission has a PSDI plan that all of the instruments need to figure out how to fit themselves into. And so that would maybe encourage, at the end of missions that have multiple PIs, how to create something at the end. It's like what we have for Mercury.
Requirements.
Yeah.
Without them, it's not.
Right.
So we've got about 10 minutes left, so to close it out with questions for these guys, I'm gonna raise one of the points that you made, if that's okay, and ask these guys. So what are the primary hurdles that you guys see in getting a PSDI off the ground? We're taking what I would argue is an implicit, already existing PSDI and turning it into something that is more explicit. And then what's your vision in 6 years? So like, what exactly are we going to be talking about here in 6 years? And if we see the same figures, so what do all these PSDIs look like?
So coming at it from a data interoperability perspective again, I've always touted the planetary community as a microcosm of every kind of science, biology, geophysics, spectral. And so finding like formats and services that meet all those needs is going to be really, really hard. As we work with astronomers and as we work with biologists who use different tools and atmospheric scientists who use different formats, can we start telling them, hey, if you tweak your thing a little bit, then maybe you can fit into this same road that we're on, or hey, that's a better idea, maybe we should tweak our knowledge to their road. And I think that on the European side, they've done a good job with trying to intersect astronomy and planetary domains, standards, and it's really tough. So I see that as the biggest issue.
So for me, I guess communication is always going to be the biggest issue. Pardon me. And we're doing a good job. We're very fortunate right now that we've been able to have buy-in from NASA headquarters, get funding to do a lot of these things, have people who are motivated to have meetings like this, and to provide venues for people to talk, but that has to continue. There has to be that continued momentum. We're also really lucky that we have somebody like Sarah Noble right now, who at headquarters is willing to listen to us and listen to some of our great ideas and give us funding to do some of these things so that we can talk to people about this. That all could change at some point somewhere else, or NASA's given some other directive, unless we have our act together through our regular communication and having a canned message or a 30-second elevator spiel that we can give to people, the decision makers of do. That's always going to be one of the limiting factors. So making sure that we continue with the communication is going to be one of the main things, in my mind, for making sure that it doesn't get in the way of what we want to do.
You're also skipping the 6-year question.
Different slant on what Justin said. I think our biggest concern is maintaining our momentum. I feel, looking back at the first data workshop in 2012, we've come already in just a handful of years so far in terms of the tools that are available, commonly used. We've made enormous progress on standardizing some of the data formats that are popular and usable to us. I think I can imagine that we will hopefully have reduced some of the product and redundancy in the community, and will be more focused on specific community needs. And I can, for example, envision a Europa PSTI that would serve the needs not only of the Europa Clipper mission, but also the community that wants to work with some of the same data. NASA currently, as you know, tends to fund, for example, Messenger. They tend to fund an internal PSTI for a mission that kind of trickle out eventually to the community. I think HiRise is another example. They have amazing tools that the team uses that are not available publicly. And so the transition from that kind of internal mission-related PSTI to a broader community PSTI will need to have happened and need to happen relatively quickly in the future, repeating ourselves and so that we can engage community priorities in that process.
I'll go next, so you can have the last word, Jeannie. So I think that right now our challenges are education, right? So we've attempted to do that here at this meeting, and hopefully we can help you do that when you go back to your own home institutions and other communities. We need to educate people about what PSDI is, and we need to do a better job of defining what the pieces are of what a planetary spatial data infrastructure might be. We have a lot of good analogs in the terrestrial community. We really need to sit down and scratch our heads and figure out what actual things are going to go into this roadmap that we're thinking about writing. Start to get more specific about these things. And then hopefully that won't be the biggest hurdle, and we'll go on to something else.
I think in 5 years from now, we'll actually be in a really good position, and I'm confident in our communication with headquarters now and into the future. And the reason for that is that headquarters be very good at digging down to the very we're doing and understanding exactly what our needs are and having a strong vision themselves of what they want, and being very really specific programs and not letting them sort of get trampled under by the bigger endeavors that they're doing. And so I feel like I know it's something that's important to maintain and to always be sure to communicate with them, but I'm actually really confident about the future of this discussion with NASA. And so I think I'm excited about the prospect of dipping back up to the broader infrastructure that we're discussing right now. This is a really community-wide framework that we're thinking about right now, but hopefully that will be pretty well established and we can revisit it a little bit. But at the same time, we'll also be talking very specifically about something like, well, we want to grow with Clementine and with, Surveyor or whatever, and we're talking to HEOMD because we want this specific region right here, and we want to bring all of our resources to bear on that place, and we'll be ready to do that. And
yeah, just to be fair to answer the question that Jay posed about the 6 years from my perspective, I would love to see a Moon SDI, a Mars SDI, an Asteroid SDI, all of them with their own constraints and situations that all of them can then also work together. Ideal if we were there, Mike.
So I know that there's been some interaction between MapSit and the AGs as far as trying to increase visibility of what you guys are doing, but that brings up the question: already exist for Mars and for the Moon, for the outer planets community. And so to what extent do you see MapSit, what's the relationship between kind of what MapSit is doing and then farming out, in a way, the prioritization, the identification of those PSDIs within the other tags? What the structure of that should be?
yeah, I think it would be really important to keep communicating with them and talking with them about what their priorities are, certainly. And this past year, as you say, we've been trying to go out and at least have somebody there about maps at PSDI and trying to introduce this idea to the AGs. But as we go forward, we should continue to do that and continue to try to go to those meetings and talk to them and see what they prioritize.
So the role I see for many of the ags is science-based and exploration-based largely. And in my own observation, many of the ags' perspective is that what we're talking about through PSDI will already exist. So they tend to, in some cases, not all, they tend to assume that we're doing what we're doing through this team. And so I think it's really essential that we partner with them to remind them that these elements are not necessarily happening full of community interest and input, and that we make sure that they're happening when they need them. And I think combining our voices makes our voices that much stronger and that much louder. So I think we have a very important role in advising the other ags about things they may not be considering, which are vital to progress and their future. So.
I think it's also relevant to not think of the ag structure as different teams, right? Membership in ags is not a radio button, but check boxes, right? So I consider myself a member of MEPAG and OPAG and MAPSIT, right? And so the more people that intersect with more of those organizations can help all of them do better.
So I think on that really positive note, we're gonna close off this panel discussion. Thank you to all the panelists for sitting up here and getting grilled. Appreciate it.
Well, I just have a few closing thoughts. We have come, as I said, a very long way in the handful of years that we've been doing these data workshops. We can do it without everyone here in the room, without the 196 registrations that we had this week. Issues with parallel sessions because people wanted to be in all places at once, and we'll try to resolve those. If anyone has any thoughts about aspects like that, please send them to me by email, lgaddis@usgs.gov. But thank you very much for coming. I know many of you came a really long way. We really appreciate you being here. Thanks to everyone for your help. Thanks for all of the session chairs. Thanks to Jay for moderating our panel discussion. And thanks very much for coming. And
go home.
Hope you have safe travels.
Go home, man.
For all MAPSIT steering committee members, we're going to reconvene back up at the USGS Geology Science Center, Roddy Room, 1:30? Yeah, 1:30. We'll see you there.
What is the next?
Sorry.
Hey.
I just wanted to check where I need to go.
So we're going to meet at the. So if you go, this is the big green metal building. The flagpole right here. The double doors is here.
Yeah.
And so there'll be signs to go. This is a big long circular. It's not circular, but it's square. Our meeting is right over here.
Okay.
So flagpole, double door, get a sticker, and then head over to here, pass the light.
Okay. Is there